Okay, this video is probably going to take a while, so I don't want to cover too much before the challenge truly starts. I choose Sprigatito as my starter. I'd used Fuecoco on my first playthrough of Pokemon Scarlet, so I wanted to make a different choice, but I also have my reasons for this particular choice. Next, I go through the usual intro stuff, like battling my rival, getting Koraidon, and the initial school stuff before setting out my 3 trials. In particular, the one of interest for this video is the Victory Road trial. Now that the tutorial is out of the way, the challenge has officially begun. Unfortunately, I have a long way to go before I can even take on my first gym battle. A Pokemon I thought at the time would be essential for the first few fights was Gholdengo, so you know what that means. I'm off to scour Paldea for 999 Gimmighoul coins. While I get on the long hunt for coins, let me give a bit more detail about what this challenge will actually involve. Firstly, I cannot deal damage with any attacks if I'm attacking a trainer's Pokemon. Of course, this includes regular physical and special attacks, but I'm also including damage from things like Will-O-Wisp or Poison Powder. That said, if I were to use something like Confuse Ray, the text for that status effect does say Pokemon hit itself in confusion, so I won't count that as me dealing damage. Things like Entry Hazards and Weather that deal damage also can't be used from an attack, but if an ability sets up either of these things, that isn't me selecting an attack, so this will be allowed. Also, this isn't likely to come up often, but I'm free to use regular attacks as long as they don't deal any damage. The obvious example being something like Dig against a flying type Pokemon, but also moves that can miss, or I hit a Protect or something like that, that's also fine. As for my opponent, the same rules essentially will apply. I can't take any damage from any of their attacks. That said, I am allowed to take damage from my own doing. For example, if I were to use Explosion against a Ghost type, this move doesn't break any of my rules, I won't have done any damage to the opponent's Pokemon, and although my Pokemon may have fainted, all the damage I took would have been from my side. I won't apply these rules to wild Pokemon for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I can see myself needing to capture quite a few different Pokemon for this challenge, and it would needlessly lengthen the challenge resetting over and over again, trying to capture wild Pokemon before they attacked. Secondly, the Titan battles come in 2 parts, and in the second part, Arven will assist in the battle, and will therefore both inflict and receive damage out of my control. So to save on a bit of a headache, I'm just going to let these go on as normal. As you can see from the footage currently playing, I decided to go ahead and take care of the first Titan as early as possible. Although it isn't a requirement for the Victory Road story or anything, defeating Cloth will allow Koraidon to dash when I'm riding it, which will save me a lot of time when I'm searching for coins. After a few hours of searching, I decided to head to Kitakami, as there's a few Pokemon exclusive to that area that I think will come in useful during this challenge, so I may as well grab them now. Unfortunately, as I head into the region, I realise I may have accidentally softlocked myself. I hadn't planned on making any progress with the DLC story yet, so once the intro cutscene ended, I planned on just heading into the wild. It turns out though that I'm only allowed to move around the initial area until I've gone into town. Doing so, however, will trigger a battle with Carmine, and at this point I have not assembled a team that can deal with her. I briefly panic and start to worry I'll have to reset the challenge. In terms of story progression, this wouldn't be a huge loss, but I already spent quite a few hours working on finding Gimmighouls. But then, I realised the Gimmighouls are actually the answer to my problem. Because I've searched a lot of Paldea, I have some very high level Gimmighoul, but still no badges. This means I can't control them well in battles yet. With this in mind, I take on a bunch of wild Pokemon with my level 50 and get its health worn down. After which, I take on Carmine, and after a few resets, my Gimmighoul hits itself in confusion first turn in the fight, knocking itself out before Poochyena can get an attack in. This causes me to lose the battle, and thankfully this is a battle that you can lose and still make progress. With that battle out of the way, I'm now free to explore the region and continue collecting Pokemon. Okay, after a lot of setup, I'm finally ready to take on Artazon's gym. Although chronologically not the first gym, I think it will be the easiest one for this type of challenge. He opens up with Petilil, and taking a quick look at its moveset, we can immediately see a fundamental weakness. All of its attacks are grass type, so by starting things off with dealing, I won't take any damage from any attack used. Thankfully, the gym trainer AI isn't smart enough to switch out to another Pokemon that will be more useful, so I can begin to PP stall. I am going to need to switch later on, so I spend my first few turns using 6 sand attacks to bring Petilil's accuracy down as low as possible. I am going to be relying on cheesy evasion strategies for some of the fights in this run, but hopefully you can appreciate this is more for positioning purposes as opposed to winning the whole fight. Anyway, after all the sand attacks, I just start spamming Growl as much as possible. It could have been any non-damaging move, but the fact that this move lowers attack does provide a bit of a bonus. I'm going to skip ahead here, since the next few turns are just me absorbing all the grass attacks and spamming growl. I wait until Petilil has 1 PP left in 1 attack, and then switch in Goldengo. This turn is where the sand attack gamble comes in, and thankfully this time I dodge the attack. For my next attack, I set up a substitute as Petilil is forced to struggle. Now, just to go over that turn with regards to the challenge, the damage done to Goldengo was down to its own substitute, and Petilil's damage was only caused by itself. Both of these are acceptable forms of damage based on the rules I already stated. Speaking of struggle, it isn't affected by accuracy checks, so it's down now to Goldengo to tank each one. But thankfully, dealing's earlier growls mean the substitutes won't be too easy to break. I also made sure to go hunt down the leftovers from Medali, so Goldengo can recover off the damage done to itself. I spend the next few turns spamming status moves that don't really matter too much, and eventually Petilil knocks itself out. 1 down, 2 to go, as Smoliv is brought in next. Looking at its moveset, we aren't just dealing with grass type attacks this time, but its normal tackle attack can be just as easily dealt with. Once again, the AI isn't smart enough here to have any kind of foresight, so I can easily swap Goldengo out for dealing to tank the Razor Leaf he thinks makes the most sense to use against a ghost type. Following this, I can switch dealing back out for Goldengo to tank the tackle he thinks makes the most sense to use against a grass type. What's particularly nice about this moveset is that Tackle has 10 more PP than Razor Leaf does. So, as we skip ahead to where Smoliv only has tackles left, I can bring in Goldengo to safely set up a substitute this time. There's now 10 turns of nothing as Smoliv can't deal damage and Goldengo just has to wait. Honestly, my main concern here is that I run out of PP, but eventually Smoliv is forced to struggle. I wasn't able to reduce its attack with Growl this time, but I do set up screens which should offset the damage enough to sort the next few turns. Now for the real challenge of this gym battle. Sudowoodo comes out last. Looking at its moveset, we have Trailblaze, which is at least another grass type attack I can in theory tank with dealing. The other attack though is Rock Throw, which is obviously a rock type attack, which is not something I can bring in an immune Pokemon for. I'm going to need to get a bit more creative to PP stall here, and as you may have seen from my team composition, part of this involves bringing in a squad of Diglett. The Diglett serve 2 purposes for this fight. Firstly, they all have the move Protect, meaning I can get 4 turns of guaranteed safety from damage, wasting a bit of PP. Secondly, I bred them all to have Memento. This is an amazing move to have in this situation, since it will significantly lower Sudowoodo's attack stat, but it will also allow me to knock out each of them without taking any damage from its attacks. This both gives me a free switching opportunity and means Sudowoodo wastes another 4 attacks not having to hit a target. At first you may think it's unfortunate that the Diglett's a ground type, since that means Sudowoodo doesn't waste any Rock Throw PP. At least that's what I thought in my first few attempts at this fight. What I hadn't considered though is that Sudowoodo is quite a slow Pokemon, and by wasting a lot of Trailblazers, it meant there would be a lot more turns where I could attack first before the speed boost got out of control. I would need to make the most of that time with Goldengo by using it as an opportunity to set up. Goldengo's Steel type means it would resist both of Sudowoodo's attacks, so I'm guessing Brassius just uses Trailblaze since it's a stronger attack here. Thankfully, after the first Trailblaze hits my substitute, I see that I am able to tank the attack without breaking the sub. I use this as an opportunity to set up Reflect once again, so the future attacks will deal even less damage. I feel in control for now, but it won't be long before Sudowoodo will be faster than my Goldengo, so it will require some prediction as to whether or not the substitute will break, and if I need to replace it before I'm attacked again. Not only did I have the growing speed issue, but if you take a look at my moveset, none of my moves have particularly high PP, and this fight still has a bit more to it. Substitute in particular was my main concern. The damage it dealt to put up was basically a non-issue for now, since a combination of leftovers and protect meant I would get a lot of, if not all of my HP back. I really didn't have any clue how many more hits I could take, and being very paranoid there were quite a few turns where I used the substitute earlier than I needed, wasting a power point that I may need later on. I was able to find turns where I could cast the screens again, so this did save some turns, but even then, I could at any turn take an unexpected critical hit, and not have the sub back up in time to tank the next attack. One thing I did have going in my favour during all this though was surely Trailblazer's PP must be running low, and that would only leave Rock Throw. As I already mentioned, there's no way for me to absorb a rock attack, but Rock Throw in particular does have shaky accuracy, which meant even if I was caught off guard, the RNG gods may just step in and save me. After a while, I inevitably run out of protects, and with only a couple of substitutes left, I just start spamming screens, praying that all of my Diglett's memento nerfs will be enough. Luckily, as the rock throws also start to run out, I do call the turn my sub would break, and bring up a new one immediately. At this point, I felt like I was in the clear. The struggles really shouldn't do much damage against a fresh substitute, so for the last few turns of the fight, I just spam random attacks and watch the Sudowoodo finally wears itself out and faints. This earns me my first badge and the realisation I'm going to need a few more strategies for future battles. For my second gym battle, I decided to jump all the way ahead to Medali and take on Larry. He opens up with a Kamala, and looking at its moveset, an immediate flaw becomes clear. If I'm not planning on using regular attacks anyway, the only way Kamala can actually deal damage is with Slam. My whole team is made up of Ghost type Pokemon this time, so I have nothing to worry about. But you know what? I think I have a plan for the other two Pokemon, and switching takes a long time for the animation, so I'm just going to set up a substitute and start spamming status attacks. Kamala's ability means that Thunder Wave won't do anything, but that doesn't really matter here, I'm just trying to waste turns. Skipping ahead again, after a bunch of turns of both of us doing basically nothing, Kamala finally starts to use Struggle. Now, it is faster than me, and its struggles are strong enough to break the sub, but I was careful enough up until this point not to waste any substitute PP. This means that every turn now, I can just select that as my attack, and since any Pokemon can use at most 5 struggles without healing, my 9 PP of substitute, alongside my leftovers, means that Kamala eventually knocks itself out. Ghastly levelling up here actually gave me an idea how to speed things up a little. Learning Spite means I can burn through some of my opponent's attacks without having to spend a bunch of extra turns killing time. Speaking of which, the Dunsparce comes in next and opens things up with Glare. This is actually pretty beneficial for me here since it means one of two things. Either Ghastly gets fully paralysed and that's less PP wasted on my side, or Ghastly can attack and use Spite to reduce the Dunsparce's PP by an extra 4. Looking at the Dunsparce's other attacks, we can see that Hyper Drill will be no use against Ghost types, and Drill Run will do nothing to Ghastly thanks to Levitate. This once again leads to a lot of turns of us doing nothing as the Dunsparce wastes attacks, so we'll just skip ahead a little. What I really want here though is for the Drill Run PP to run out while either Glare or Hyper Drill can still be used. Thankfully, after a bunch of glares, Larry opts to use Drill Run next, obviously doing nothing to Ghastly, but this also means that my other Ghost type Pokemon can come in afterwards and not have to worry about taking damage from other attacks. It doesn't actually matter for this attempt though, since I have to bring in Drifloon. With a couple turns free to set up, I use Substitute and a Strength Sap to both recover Drifloon's HP, but also make it so the Substitute isn't as easy to break. This isn't really the big problem though. The Dunsparce is all but defeated. The real problem is that I need Drifloon in a substituted state with a decent amount of PP left going into the third fight. Unfortunately, as the Dunsparce knocks itself out with its final struggle, the substitute breaks, leaving Drifloon exposed. Staraptor comes in and I'm pretty sure I'm screwed here. Prepared to reset the attempt, something happens that makes no sense at all to me. Staraptor opens up with Facade? I have no clue why this happened, but I just decided to run with it as Drifloon follows up with an Imprison. Although I'm not allowed to use moves like Aerial Ace throughout this run, there was nothing in the rules preventing me from teaching it to one of my Pokemon. Now looking at Staraptor's moveset, we can see with Aerial Ace locked out, the only move left to use is Facade, meaning Drifloon's safe to set up for quite a few turns. I bring the substitute back up, after which I proceed to use Strength Sap multiple times, drastically reducing Staraptor's attack, in preparation for Struggle. On the off chance I do need to restore some HP tanking the struggles later, I leave a single Strength Sap so I have access to a little bit of healing. With nothing else to do, I just use Imprison over and over again until I run out of PP for it, after which I'm forced to start eating into my substitutes until finally Staraptor begins to struggle. As we move into the final moments of the battle, I'm even running out of substitutes and Strength Saps to use. With absolutely no other options left, I'm forced to select Aerial Ace as my next attack. For once though, having my opponent's Pokemon be faster than me is an advantage. Drifloon doesn't get a chance to use an attack, since Staraptor's next struggle is enough to knock itself out, and I pick up badge number 2. With that victory under my belt, I decide to head back to Cortondo, but as I approach I'm challenged by Nemona. It turns out though that rival battles are a lot more relaxed than in older games. Instead of coming up with a strategy for her team, for now I can just bring in Diglett, have it outspeed, and use Memento to knock itself out. Nemona appears a little disappointed in me, but don't fret, we will get our real battle eventually. It was finally time to have the gym battle with the first leader, Katy, and this fight introduces one of my favourite strategies used in this run. I'm only going to need 3 Pokemon for this fight, so in theory this shouldn't take as long. I open things up with a Diglett against Nimble, so I can weaken it with Memento. My Diglett is quite a few levels higher, but realistically it could have been the same level and achieved this exact same goal. I follow this up by bringing in Glimmet. It immediately sets up a substitute, but looking at Nimble's moveset, we see one of its attacks is Double Kick. This is why I opened up with Memento. I was hoping that by lowering its attack, I would avoid the first kick breaking the sub and the second one dealing damage. I decided to terrestrialize into my poison type soon into this fight. My logic here was being a rock and a poison type, Double Kick would deal neutral damage and Struggle Bug would not be very effective. This presumably would mean that Double Kick would just be the preferred move of choice. This would be handy in a few turns, but I was paranoid about the substitute for the time being. Now, Glimmet was already faster than Nimble, but as you can see I am using Rock Polish throughout the fight. I'm not too interested in the speed boosting effect, I just needed a decently high PP move to spam, while I was waiting for the substitute to break. Although I am setting up something with Glimmet, I do need to try and PP stall Nimble where possible, so I do spend a few turns just casting Protect. This should make it easy for the Pokemon I plan to bring in to finish the job. Anyway, I continue to get fortunate not getting hit by Double Kick second strike, and after a while my Glimmet is left with 1 HP left. I cast Endure and hope my gamble pays off. Thankfully I see exactly what I want as I'm hit by another Double Kick. Because I'm on 1 HP, the Endure makes it so I take no damage, even from the second kick, but what it does do is trigger Glimmet's effect. Because it's been struck by a physical attack, a layer of Toxic Spikes are laid on the field. Even better, each individual kick trigger the effect, so 2 layers are placed. Now I need to take one more gamble as I switch Glimmet out in place of Gholdengo. Once again I have a 50-50 chance of Nimble using Double Kick and thus dealing no damage to my Ghost type. At least I thought these were gambles, presumably Nimble had actually ran out of Struggle Bugs since it continues to use Double Kick. This is great since now it means I'm in full control of this fight. I can now just set up a substitute, safe in the knowledge that Katy can't even attempt to start breaking it until struggles start being used. While Gholdengo is stalling out the double kicks, let's just go back to what happened there in a bit more detail. In the rules I stated I couldn't take damage from opponents' attacks. That didn't mean I wasn't allowed to get attacked, so Glimmet getting hit by an attack that does 0 damage stays within the rule set. As for the Toxic Spikes that were laid down, these were the result of an ability. I never used the move Toxic Spikes itself. Therefore, any poison damage dealt for the rest of the fight would not be considered the result of any attack that I used. With that distinction out of the way, let's skip ahead to Nimble's last few turns. A combination of the Memento used earlier on, a Reflect being in play, and Nimble's fairly underwhelming attack means I can tank all of the struggles without having to reset even once. One other reason why I was able to tank the damage so well you probably noticed is that Gholdengo is 10 levels higher, clearly meaning its stats are superior. My goal for this challenge was to not go in any fights over levels, and this should be the last fight where that really is the case. In retrospect though, I never even had to do it here. At the time I was taking on the first grass gym, I thought that the TM for substitute was in a place not yet accessible. This meant that I was under the impression that I could only use Pokemon that learned substitute by a level up, with Gholdengo being the one that learned it earliest. With that said, there really was nothing the remaining 2 Pokemon could do. They are badly poisoned as soon as they enter the battlefield, so the combination of Protect and Substitute provides more than enough stall to let the damage rack up quickly for both, meaning I can just sit back, relax, and look forward to receiving my 3rd gym badge. In particular, Teddiursa never stood a chance, only having access to attacks that are either resisted or outright ineffective against Gholdengo, both of which are also physical, meaning the Reflect I put up would reduce their damage even further. I make my way over to Cascarafa next, and this is the first time in the run where I have to challenge a gym trainer before I get to the leader. In this particular gym though, there's only the one, so in theory this should just be an easier version of the fight that would follow it. That would turn out not to be the case. You'll see why that is later on, but focusing on this fight for now, one thing gym trainer Hugo had going for him over the gym leader is access to a priority move in Aqua Jet. In an attempt to dissuade Hugo from using it, I open things up with Jumpluff, a grass type. Jumpluff in particular has the dual benefit of being very fast, so trying to prevent Aqua Jet means I have time to set up a substitute immediately, and Floatzel's bite attack isn't enough to immediately break it. With a free turn available to me, I can use the shaky accuracy sleep powder to put Floatzel to sleep. Even if this had missed, I would have been able to reset the sub and try again. So although I am gambling on a move that can miss, I'm still stacking the deck in my favour. Adding sleep into the mix of Jumpluff's safety, I feel confident that I can start working on some speed control. I'm able to use Cotton Spore 3 times before Floatzel wakes up, so now even my slowest Pokemon should be able to act first against it. The sub does get broken this time, but I can easily repeat the process again. I don't need to worry about speed now, so I can just go ahead and Baton Pass over to Diglett. Unlike Jumpluff, Diglett is a lot more at risk of being targeted by an Aqua Jet, so I just have to hope Floatzel doesn't wake up yet. I use Sand Attack once, which should give me an extra layer of safety, and then swiftly get out of there by using Memento. Jumpluff comes back in, and I go through the process once again to get another Diglett in. I consider going for another Sand Attack, but in the end decide to just go straight for Memento. This was a good call because Diglett immediately gets hit by an Aqua Jet, leaving it unprotected, but it did its main job of nerfing Floatzel. Okay, time to actually start dealing some damage here. I Baton Pass Jumpluff out once again, but this time for Hippopotas. Upon entry, its Sandstorm ability kicks in, summoning a Sandstorm. This will deal chip damage each turn to Floatzel. I decided to forego any healing items on Hippopotas in favour of a Smooth Rock in order to get more turns of damage. I spend the next few turns using a mix of Yawn to keep Floatzel asleep, and Sand Attack to put myself in a better position for the remainder of the fight. Because Jumpluff spent a few turns using Cotton Spore, I actually outspeed here, so I can easily reset substitutes without having to guess when they'll break. That said, Aqua Jet is still a concern, but I just pray that the Sand Attacks will save me when they crop up. Unlike Jumpluff, Hippopotas doesn't have access to the Baton Pass, so as Sandstorm starts to come to an end, I need to give my next Pokemon the best possible chance to not take a hit by any other means. With a bunch of Sand Attacks in effect, I wait until Yawn makes Floatzel fall asleep and switch out for Jumpluff. The only reason for this switch was to allow me to bring Hippopotas back in, so I substitute up and Baton Pass out once again. And, as it spends the next few turns wasting time while Sandstorm chip kicks in, I should mention that although Sandstorm is an attack I could actually use, using that would be in violation of the rules for this challenge, at least in my opinion. The attack is still causing damage in the long run. The Sandstorm ability, however, doesn't require me to select an attack, so that's why I'm allowing it. Yeah, the rules are going to get a bit muddy throughout this video. Anyway, after a few turns pass, I switch out again, this time to bring in Drifloon. Building on the already lowered opponent's accuracy, Drifloon got straight to work using Minimize, making it practically impossible to get hit. Thankfully, the trainer didn't seem to have any intention on switching out to reset the debuffs, so there will be plenty of free turns gifted to me from attack misses. Once again, I'm able to bring in Hippopotas practically riskless, by Baton Passing both the evasion boosts and the substitutes. With Floatzel's health so low now, third time would be the charm for Sandstream. I do get surprised a little when Floatzel breaks out the Swift, but even 2 in a row wasn't enough to break through, and with that the first Pokemon goes down. Clauncher comes in next, and unfortunately it also has access to the Aqua Jet I was paranoid about. Fortunately though, my evasion is still through the roof, so there was a decent chance I'd simply dodge it. Clauncher does reveal that it also knows Hornclaws though, boosting its own accuracy and attack. This is slightly concerning, but for now I can simply put it to sleep and use Sand Attacks to at least cancel out the accuracy boosts. Once again, the Sandstorm ends, so I find my opportunity to switch out Hippopotas and bring Drifloon back in. Unlike most of my Pokemon, I'd actually given it an Oran Berry to help activate its Unburden ability, because I was paranoid about being outsped. Why did I use an Oran Berry instead of something better? Simply put, at this point, that was all I had, and I really just wanted the speed boost. Strength Sap was there to provide the recovery. Speaking of which, Drifloon does get dangerously close to getting knocked out, but thankfully it is able to tank the attacks just well enough to get a Strength Sap off. After which, Clauncher struggles to string together consecutive attacks, so not only am I able to constantly reset Substitute when needed, but thanks to the attack boosts it gives itself, I'm able to get a ton of HP back with Strength Sap. Eventually, I see a decent opportunity to switch again. I know this Sandstorm won't have enough turns to knock out Clauncher, so my major concern switches to how well I can manage my PP. In theory, it probably won't matter what moves I use on the final switch in, but there does need to be something left for me to use. I take a little bit of a gamble and decide to use Rest. Although it does take me out of commission for a few turns, it does restore my HP to full and also provides 2 turns where I won't be wasting PP. The sub does get broken eventually, but it's too late. I now feel comfortable enough to switch out, and while I could probably just switch straight back into Hippopotas, I decided it would be in my best interest to spend a few turns minimising again. Once again, Clauncher is unable to do too much, so I make my final switch, and now it's just a matter of time before I win. With Yawn at my disposal, Clauncher has to hit 2 good attacks in a row, otherwise it simply falls asleep and I can essentially reset any damage that it may have done to me. So it took a while, but I'm able to beat the trainer battle and feel fairly confident in the knowledge that I can use a similar strategy against the gym leader. But before that, I decided to take a break from trainer fights and went back to Titan fights for a bit. Based on the number of badges I have, it makes sense to take on the next 2 giants due to their levels being below the threshold of what I can control. While I'm not really applying the rules to the Titan fights, most of the Pokemon I've caught so far have only been given status moves anyway, so in a way these fights are behaving a bit like a pacifist run. Beating these does mean Koraidon improves, and the extra movement abilities make things a little easier to get around, but with that little break out the way, I head back to Cascarafa. I start the fight off much like a lot of other fights, having Dugtrio use Memento to weaken the Veluza. As Dugtrio faints though, I notice something's a bit off. Veluza takes damage. It took me a second to realise, but the battle has started with a sandstorm in effect. This completely changes my plan for this fight. Absolutely for the better. Kofu has no ground, rock or steel type Pokemon, so all I've got to do is weather the attacks without taking any damage and let the sand do its thing. I bring in Drifloon next and set up a substitute, fairly confident that the previous debuff probably means I can tank at least one attack. With that, I'm pretty sure I've got the whole fight won. I now have the chance to set up a Minimise. This gives me a chance now to let the evasion boost snowball. I tried to use Strength Sap for some recovery, but I guess the previous Memento means that there isn't too much attack to absorb. I should be able to keep this up long enough to take down Veluza, but the critical hit Aqua Cutter immediately breaking my substitute does concern me a little. With Drifloon in red bar, I decided it's time to Baton Pass and bring in Jumpluff. This should mean that I resist the water attacks better and I can continue the Baton Pass chain later, keeping the evasion boosts. Unfortunately, the leftovers it's holding and the sandstorm damage will cancel each other out. My best bet is just to spam sleep moves and pray. I move on to the second Pokemon, still at full HP, and intend to continue using Sleep Powder here too. I was a little paranoid that Wugtrio may outspeed me though, assuming that, much like its Cantonian cousin, it would have a very high speed stat. It turns out Jumpluff still outsped, but oh well, no damage done. I could have looked up the speed stats before I chose my attack, but I knew I would outspeed after the Cotton Spore, so I wasn't really much danger of taking any unexpected damage. There's a couple of thrilling to watch turns where we both miss our attacks, but I eventually send Wugtrio to sleep. What follows is a few turns of wasting time as I let the chip damage add up, but eventually Jumpluff is forced to expend some of his HP as I get hit by a critical hit headbutt and am forced to reset the substitute. Although this fight is going pretty much as well as I'd hoped, it has highlighted one issue I constantly need to be wary of during this challenge. Because basically all the fights have become wars of attrition, I have to accept that statistically it is quite likely to have to deal with one or even more critical hits in every fight. This really emphasises why speed control is so important. If I unexpectedly have my sub broken when I outspeed, not too much to worry about. I can just set it back up on my next turn. On the other hand, if I unexpectedly have my sub broken when I'm slower, I'll either have had to have predicted that was going to happen and set up a new sub on the same turn, or on my next turn I'll have to maneuver carefully to avoid whatever damage may be dealt by my opponent before I can set up again. Wugtrio goes for one final desperation water pulse before it goes down and breaks my sub. This time though, I know for a fact that Crabominable isn't very fast Pokemon, so I don't need to worry about speed control here. Although Crabominable does initially have a part ice typing, its moveset does not include any ice attacks, and 2 of its 3 attacks are not very effective against Jumpluff, so things are looking pretty hopeful. Since Kofu presumably isn't very keen on using not very effective attacks, he decides to begin things off by using the move Slam. Not only did my Pokemon have a very high evasion, but I'd also forced my opponent to resort to a move that already had a pretty poor accuracy of 75. I thought Cotton Spore would be something that in theory would be useful in case I needed to switch around my slower Pokemon, but surely this wouldn't actually be required. Well, against all odds, Crabominable wakes up and manages to actually land a Slam attack. Due to its pretty high attack, landing just one of these is all it takes to break my sub. That's okay though, I can put a sub back up pretty easily, and surely it wouldn't happen again. Who am I kidding? Of course it was going to happen again, and it happened again pretty quick. Now my HP was in a really poor state. I panicked a bit and used sleep powder before setting up a sub, but thankfully it does land and I bat and pass out to Hippopotas, hoping its high defense stats should provide a bit more safety. This was also somewhat of a poor choice though, since Kofu now switches back to using his Terra Water Crab Hammer, shattering a new sub immediately. After this though, the evasion boosts and following sand attack accuracy debuffs finally pay off, as Crabominal proceeds to miss multiple attacks in a row. This puts me comfortably back in control of this fight, as I'm able to waste the last few turns before the sandstorm damage finishes things off, and I'm halfway through the gym battles. It wouldn't matter too much yet, but progressing to this point would give me the ability to change my Pokemon's Terra type, something that would be extremely helpful as the challenge progressed. I knew before the Iono fight that I'd essentially be playing hide and seek with battles sprinkled in between. What I'd forgotten is that there was no break in between where I could heal my Pokemon, so I wasn't prepared for whatever was going to be in the second fight. We'll come to that after though. For now, I was up against a trainer who only had a single Luxio to deal with. A 1 against 6 should be easy enough at least, so I opened things up like I did against the water trainers. This time though, I didn't have any priority to worry about, so I could open things up with Dugtria's Memento instead of having to try and manoeuvre it in carefully. This time I also didn't need to worry as much about Jumpluff immediately losing its sub, since Luxio decides to go for a setup move in charge instead, meaning I can go for a free sleep powder. Despite missing a few sleep powders in a row, Luxio just continues to go for charge. I eventually do land one, and thanks to there not being a sandstorm this time, my HP is practically fully recovered. It was now time to start dealing some damage, so I bat and passed in Hippopotas and tried to start getting to work with Sand Attack. A combination of Yawn for sleep, Sand Attack for accuracy, and Luxio's own finite PP should mean I could just win this fight through forcing it to struggle. The problem with that idea though is that I had to jump straight into another fight after this, and if I lost that one, I'd have to redo both. And if I was potentially going to have to redo this fight, I wanted to have a plan that ended things as quick as possible. As expected, the sandstorm after a few turns wears off, but at this point Luxio was in a pretty poor state. I wait for my last Yawn to kick in and bring Jumpluff back. I go through the same process again, but since Luxio's main attacks appear to be electric and dark type, I don't bother bringing in Drifloon to stack evasion boosts. No sense risking a super effective attack breaking a substitute early. As Hippopotas and Jumpluff continued to run circles around Luxio, one thing I was starting to think about was what exactly happened between battles. As mentioned earlier, it had been a while since I'd originally played through the game, so I wasn't sure whether I'd be healed up after each fight. My two key Pokemon in this fight were still in pretty good shape, but it would be unfortunate if going into the second fight I didn't have access to my Dugtrio to start things off. Well, I'd soon find out as Luxio faints and I move on to fight Gym Leader Michael. He opens things up with Tynamo, so although I can immediately see that Dugtrio wasn't revived, I'm not too worried since Tynamo has pretty poor base stats. So much so that its super effective Charge Beam isn't enough to break through Drifloon's substitute. Okay, so I did say earlier that I wouldn't be over leveling anymore, but this was the Drifloon I used back against Larry. I hadn't specifically over leveled it for this fight. Maybe I should have gone away and captured a few more Drifloon to use at a lower level. I don't know. Maybe this is a bit cheap, but as we've seen in a few fights now, being a few levels higher actually doesn't make me invincible. This particular Drifloon does have a Terra type of flying, as opposed to Ghost, so Charge Beam increasing its special attack, and not being able to avoid it hitting me super effectively, could come to be an issue over time. For now though, I have time to set up a few Minimize, since even though it had given itself a special attack boost, Tynamo decided to start using Spark. Maybe the evasion boost made the AI think it's better to go with a more accurate attack? I use the time afforded to me to switch out for Hippopotas and start the Sandstream process all over again. Now the two attacks I've seen so far are electric types, so I'm not even sure if I'm in any danger for the time being. Turns out there is a non-electric attack, but a tackle from an already debuffed Tynamo shouldn't cause too much concern. It does actually manage to break the sub though, so I am left depending on my evasion boost to dodge the next tackle. Just the one is enough though, as Yawn kicks in and I bring Jumpluff back. Tynamo outspeeding Hippopotas isn't something I want to deal with again, so I begin using Cotton Spore, also giving the Sandstorm time to rack up damage. I guess Tynamo got a good night's sleep last night or something, since it just doesn't want to remain asleep for very long, and I'd rather not let Jumpluff get too weakened while there's another Pokemon left to deal with. With that in mind, I decided to just sub and get out of there, bringing Drifloon back in. I still can't figure out what the Tynemo's trainer is thinking with his choice in attacks, since I'm able to get Drifloon in for free, as Tackle deals no damage. Charge Beam finally comes back around, and is enough to break the sub, but I guess an exposed Drifloon seemed like too good of an opportunity to miss, as Tynamo tries to go for a Thunder Wave. Of course though, I set up the sub once again, and therefore get essentially another free turn and Baton Pass back out. Looking back on this battle, now knowing the full moveset, it probably would have been much quicker just to spend each turn switching between Drifloon and Hippopotas. Tynamo only knows normal and electric type moves, so I'm pretty sure the AI would have simply tried to use a normal attack on Hippopotas, so I could switch to Drifloon for the ghost immunity. Then, when he inevitably used an electric attack next, I could have switched to Hippopotas back into the ground immunity. Getting back to what I actually did do though, my concern now has moved on from not taking damage and instead worrying about PP management. I make the call to bring Jumpluff back in despite the health issues. It's in and out pretty quick though, as I set up for the last time as Tynamo faints shortly after the Sandstorm returns, but not before breaking the sub just in time. Fluffy comes in next, and not only do I outspeed, meaning I can safely set up a fresh substitute, Fluffy tries to use Cotton Spore, which I'm protected against, so I get a free turn of chip damage here. With this being the last Pokemon, I no longer need to worry about PowerPoint management, so I get to work with Sand Attack. Before switching Drifloon in, I'd learned that Fluffy knows Cotton Spore, Charge and Takedown. Now presumably at this point, it would have been clear that the last move should have been some kind of electric attack, meaning once again, it would have been simple just to constantly swap to avoid taking any damage. Oh well, that's fine. This strategy is working too, it just takes a bit longer. Now for some reason, Fluffy's decided that it wants to charge up, presumably to the point of exploding, so I'm able to rest up Hippopotas, saving a couple turns not using power points and getting back to full health. Even better, once Fluffy is done charging, it goes back to using takedowns, which are adding some recoil damage into the Sandstorm mix. Presumably I could have just left Hippopotas in for the rest of the fight and let Fluffy knock itself out, but at this point I have no idea what this trainer's thinking. Most of his turns are left charging, but I've yet to see an electric attack, and its special defense has already been maxed out. Honestly, have I missed something? There's been a lot of turns in this battle, so maybe I zoned out, but I don't recall ever seeing an electric attack. I guess I'll enjoy the bad choices while they last. I'm sure the gym leader won't give me as much of a free pass. Jumping into the Iono fight, the first thing you may notice is that I have a Klefki that is way over leveled. Now, I know I've gone on a few times already about using any more Pokemon whose levels are too high, but you'll see here that the level isn't too relevant. In fact, the level being high actually means that it has a tendency to ignore my attack commands. Okay, so maybe the high stats are helping my substitute tank the damage from Wattrel's attacks, but as you may have noticed, Klefki is on a self-imposed timer. It's holding a black sludge item which is slowly draining its HP. Now this isn't damage caused by an enemy attack, so it's still acceptable for this challenge. During this messy process, I managed to get a Trick Room set up and then swap out for Hippopotas. Fairly confident that Wattrel will try and use an electric attack, so I should be fine. Trick Room being set up now means that on my next turn I can set up a sub. Going back to Klefki though, what the heck was going on there? Why was I using a high level Pokemon that was injuring itself just so I could set up Trick Room? Haven't I already shown that I've got better ways for speed control? Well, despite this being a gym leader fight, I won't be getting a break straight after, so things will become clear later. Focusing on this fight though, Hippopotas has done a good job of getting Wattrel to go to sleep, so now I can bring in Glimmet, bringing back the strategy I used in Cortondo. Wattrel very kindly decides to stay asleep for a few turns, meaning I have a chance to set up a Rock Polish, making sure I can outspeed later. Its Spark attack is perfect here, since it's physical, only hits once, and is enough to break the sub in one hit. The latter isn't super important, but these fights already drag on enough as it is, so you know, small optimizations here and there. As Glimmet's health drops to 1, I use Endure to allow me to set up Toxic Spikes, and check to see if Wattrel wants to keep using Spark, or go for a quick attack as I expected, since it's a priority move that the AI believes can get a knockout. Knowing this is exactly what Iono wants to do, I swap in Drifloon safely and I get to work on the same strategy that I've used against the gym trainers. The usual combination of Minimize, Substitute and Strength Sap work out pretty well, and I Baton Pass out for Hippopotas, who presumably will be practically invulnerable now, since it's immune to electric attacks and I can't imagine Pluck will be able to do much damage. Wattrel spends the next few turns presumably building an intense hatred of sand, as both the Sandstorm chip damage adds up and the sand attacks blind it further and further. Of course though, this isn't Gen 5, so the smooth rock can only maintain the sandstorm for 8 turns max, meaning I need to reset with Drifloon. This time though, I'm not able to set up evasion boosts as well as I'd have liked, since Drifloon's HP is getting worn down quite quick, and I'm not done with it after the first Pokemon, so I switched back to Hippopotas quite early. It's not too big of an issue though, its bulk and the work already done with sand attack is plenty enough to get the final few turns of sand damage. 1 down and 3 to go, which may seem a little concerning at first since I've had to invest quite a bit of effort with 3 of my Pokemon already. Thankfully though, things are about to get a lot simpler. Speaking of simple things, it's Clodsire vs Bellibolt next, and let's quickly take a look at Bellibolt's moveset. Really Iono? It's a mid-game gym leader that has 2 moves on one of her Pokemon? I mean, her loss is my gain, since Clodsire's ground typing and water absorbability means there's nothing Bellibolt can even do to deal damage. Not only that, but it's also a grounded Pokemon, so my toxic spikes kick in and get to work. Clearly Bellibolt is doomed to faint before it can do anything, so I'm just going to race through this fight. All you need to know is that Clodsire is spending its turns boosting both its defense and special defense. Moving on to Iono's third Pokemon, Luxio comes in and once again gets poisoned. Sadly this time though, it does have moves that can actually deal damage to Clodsire. That's okay though, the time gifted to me from Bellibolt has meant that Clodsire is now very tanky. It's going to take about 8 turns for the poison to knock out Luxio, and Clodsire knows Protect, which it can use every other turn, so I only have to deal with 4 attacks. The turns where I don't use Protect, I build up more curse boosts. I do want to make sure that I'm ready for the final Pokemon though, so as the poison does its work on Luxio, I start preemptively using Substitute, just in case a crit or something else gets through and I'm caught unprepared. Lastly we have Mismagius, which is a shame for me since it has the ability Levitate, meaning it won't land on the toxic spikes. Guess I'll have to go back to the weather strats for this one. Taking a look at its attacks, we have 1 ghost type damaging move and 1 electric type. This was the main reason I wanted Clodsire here. Yes, its ability to stall the previous 2 Pokemon was helpful, but having it face Mismagius with a bunch of amnesia boosts means Iono really has no choice but to waste her turns trying to Hex her way past me. Thankfully, Hex has only 10 power points, and Clodsire has just enough Protect and Substitutes left that it can force Mismagius to run out of PP. Once I see the Confuse Ray come out from Mismagius, I know I'm in the clear. Time to set up for the end of the battle. Now when Hippopotas was fighting Wattrel, I had used Rest, meaning that it came back into this fight already asleep. That was fine though, if anything that just gave Mismagius time to waste power points, but even once it woke up, the only damaging move was Electric, and even if I did get confused by Confuse Ray, we've already established that confusion damage is damage to myself, and therefore fine. Not that confusion damage was even a possibility though, since I have 2 Pokemon on my team that are essentially now immune to any damage that can be dealt, I can just spend the next however many turns switching in and out, ensuring the Sandstorm is always summoned as quickly as possible. It takes a while, but since there's no risk, let's just skip to the end of the battle, as Mismagius goes down and I earn myself badge number 5. So, remember that Klefki lead from earlier? It was never needed in the gym fight, it was for the impatient Nemona not giving me a chance to switch things up after I won. This begs the question then, why was I willing to use a less than ideal strategy in the previous fight? The simple answer, this fight has Accelerock. Nemona's lead Liking Rock comes with 2 priority attacks. Of course, I could have dealt with Quick Attack by just using a Ghost type, but nothing in this game is immune to Rock type damage. My plan to get around this was to start the fight off by terastallizing my Klefki to Steel type, while blocking the first attack attempt with a Protect. I'd hoped that now I was a pure Steel type, the most tempting attack for Nemona to use would be Bite. Lycanroc is still a pretty fast Pokemon though, so that's why I chose Klefki in particular. Its Prankster ability means that all the moves I've given it will have increased priority, so I can set up a sub before taking a hit. All this time Klefki's been taking damage from Black Sludge, and it was finally time to have that pay off. With a free turn available, I used Switcheroo, giving Lycanroc the Black Sludge. This would mean it would now start to slowly lose health each turn, which is a good thing, since being a rock type meant that the Sandstream strategy I'd been using so far wouldn't really work. Things aren't totally in the clear yet though. In order to set all this up, I had to forego giving Klefki any sort of recovery. This really limits the number of substitutes I can make, especially since I'd already taken a decent amount of damage from the Black Sludge. I resort to trying to use double protect to buy myself just enough time, and with 3 HP left on my side, Liking Rock goes down. Pomo is up next, which actually was a pleasant surprise. I was expecting Goomy next, but this works much better for me. Pomo really wants to paralyze Jumpluff, so I can easily get substitutes up and shrug off any status attempts. Jumpluff may be outspeeding here, but I need Pomo to be slower for other Pokemon, so I go through the whole Sleep Powder and Cotton Spore process again. Pomo lulls me into a false sense of security by staying asleep through all the Cotton Spores, but then wakes up just in time to get a quick attack in before I bat and pass out. It's a little concerning that Glimmet is exposed, but being a rock type should mean I won't see a quick attack just yet, and I should be able to just outspeed everything else. As I spend the next few turns getting ready to set up Toxic Spikes again, I realised that there's something I hadn't planned for. I specifically leveled up Glimmet before the gym fight, giving it HP ups to make sure that 4 substitutes would bring it down to exactly 1 HP. During the course of the 2 battles though, Glimmet did level up, but its new HP was still 1 greater than a multiple of 4. I don't know if Glimmet's base stats essentially guarantee that would always be the case, but I guess if not, some careful EV training before all this would have been enough to keep things right. I confirm once again that Nemona is looking to go for a priority knockout by enduring a quick attack. Knowing this is the case, I switch Drifloon in. I've gotten quite fortunate this run so far, a lot of the time having a convenient switch in for Glimmet. Maybe the next time I use this strategy, I should have a less risky method prepared. Nemona decides to keep up the tradition other trainers with electric Pokemon seem to have. She decides to use a Thunder Wave at the worst time, for them at least, since it does nothing when I'm behind a sub. Right, instead of me going through the Sandstream loop for the 100th time, let's talk about a few other things. Firstly, I realise this may be getting a little bit repetitive, but I won't be constantly relying on weather damage for everything during this challenge. This is in 3 parts because I want to try some other strategies. I can't be relying on 3 or 4 Pokemon for this kind of setup once trainers start having more Pokemon. PowerPoint management was already proving to be a bit of a struggle. And finally, if you know what's coming with the Elite 4, you'll be aware that 2 of the members have full teams of Pokemon that are immune to sand damage. Another thing I was thinking about was, when I first thought about doing this challenge, I assumed the Victory Road story would be more than enough to deal with. Now, I don't think that's changed, and we're yet to even see if I manage to complete the whole thing, but I do feel a little more confident I could come up with something for the other main storylines. Maybe even the DLCs. The Blueberry Academy would give me access to a lot more Pokemon I haven't been able to use here. On top of that, it focuses more on double battles, which have a completely different dynamic, as we'll see later in the Ghost Gym. Alright, ramble over. Goomy comes in and immediately gets poisoned. I've already got evasion boosts and a sub in place, so I may as well start doubling down with sand attacks. The previous sand stream is still in effect, so the damage is adding up pretty quick. Well, you know, pretty quick relative to how slow most of these fights have gone. I get ready to reset the sub, but Goomy never manages to get an attack in, and just as the sandstorm wears off, the poison does just enough damage to get the knockout. 1 Pokemon to go, and it's another one that can't resist the poison. This probably won't be the last time I need to fight multiple trainers in a row, but it will probably be the only time I have to take on multiple trainers who use different types, so I'm quite pleased that the setup was applicable to both. I probably should have realised that Quaquaval was strong enough to break through the sub in 1 with its Terra Ward Aqua Steps, so I was left in quite a vulnerable position the first time this happens. Fortunately, the accuracy manipulation was enough to give me a chance to reset the sub. I don't take any more chances for the rest of the battle. The poison damage is going to take less turns than I have power points left in substitute, so I spend the remainder of the game spamming the same move just in case. Thinking back, I didn't have much of a backup plan here. Aqua Step has raised Quaquaval's speed quite a lot. Nothing I brought in would have been able to outspeed and set up. With 3 gyms left, I decided there's a few more Pokemon I'd like to use from the Teal Mask, so I head back over to Kitakami. And you wouldn't believe it, but I managed to accidentally trigger another part of the story where I'm trapped in the area until I battle a trainer. This time it's Kieran, and as much as I'm sure he'd like a good battle, I'm going to have to duck out of this one quickly. Unlike last time, I have a Pokemon prepared, so I shift my party to only have Dugtrio and Momentum immediately for a quick loss. After picking a few new Pokemon up, I move on to the Glaseado gym. Chronologically, it's the last gym you're supposed to take on, but the trainer test beforehand doesn't involve any battles, so it's probably going to be the easiest of the remaining gyms. Let's take a quick look at Frostmoth's moveset in this fight. When I first took a look at this, I thought it could be an issue since the types it uses I can't be immune to. Thinking a bit longer though, I realised that these particular attacks are either wind based or sound based. Now that is something I can work with. This fight took a few attempts, and in each attempt I noticed Frostmoth often liked to open up with Tailwind. This would give Grusha's team a temporary speed boost, but it would give me a chance to set up. I take that chance and have Ribombee set up a sticky web. It wouldn't be too important yet, but it's going to pay off later on in the battle. Since Ribombee is a fairy type, I was pretty sure Grusha wouldn't want to use Bug Buzz, so I immediately switched in Bramblegast. The Wind Rider ability means that any wind based attack, like Blizzard, is completely nullified and I get a stat boost instead. Now the stat boost is for my offensive stats, but that's fine, the immunity is more than enough. Since the only move that can deal damage to Bramblegast is Bug Buzz, Grusha has no choice but to use it. To get around this, I switch in Jangmo-o, who has the soundproof ability, once again meaning I take no damage. Now Jangmo-o's only job in this fight is to bring it in on sound based attacks, so there's no reason to level it up, meaning I've gone from being over leveled in other fights to being under leveled here. This is a lot more satisfying and ironically feels a lot more safe. Well, for now at least. I really want Bug Buzz's power points to run out as quickly as possible in this fight, but unfortunately, sometimes when I switch in Jangmo-o, the Tailwind is just petered out, meaning Frostmoth spends its turn setting it back up, instead of using Bug Buzz. That should be okay though, since Bug Buzz does have less power points than Tailwind and Blizzard combined. There's quite a lot of me needing to know exactly how many power points every attack has left in this fight, so I do have to manually keep track of what's going on. But because I do this, I know when Blizzard is run out. This gives me a chance to bring in Jangmo-o. In my practice attempts, it seemed like Grusha would just use one of her 2 remaining moves randomly if Tailwind was already set up. I didn't really like those odds though. Jangmo-o does come with 1 extra bonus though, besides the sound immunity. The move Taunt will stop Frostmoth from using Tailwind for 3 straight turns. Not only that, but I also have access to the move Scary Face. Using this 3 times will bring down Frostmoth's speed so much that even my level 19 unevolved Pokemon can outspeed it. This is great because now, whenever Frostmoth shakes off the taunt, I can get another taunt in before Frostmoth moves. This is one of the places where the power point management is so important. If I miscount how many Bug Buzz are left, Frostmoth will be forced to struggle if it's under taunt and I'll take damage. I am able to track the power points just right though, and immediately bring in Bramblegast back in once it's safe. It has some important setting up to do, and not a ton of time to do it in. I need to max out my defense stat, so I just start spamming Defense Curl. These early game single stat boost moves are really proving to be a godsend in this run. It has so much PP, which I'm absolutely going to need in abundance. Eventually, Frostmoth is forced to struggle. Now, I just need to hope there's no crits that can break through the sub. This time, I get through unscathed, and I move on to the scariest part of this gym battle. Beartic could be trouble. It has both a super effective attack in Icicle Crash, and a priority move in Aqua Jet. Unlike a few of my other battles, I can't Baton Pass out with this Pokemon, and I'd hate to lose all those defense boosts I've stacked up already. My best bet seems to be using the move Spite. It doesn't exactly stop the moves I'm worried about, but at least it acts a bit like the pressure ability, greatly reducing the power points of the move each time it's used. Beartic is able to break through my sub pretty quickly with Icicle Crashes. With this in mind, I'm a little tempted to Terra Ghost to get rid of my ice weakness, but I do worry that by doing so, this will cause Beartic to use Aqua Jet more often. Obviously this would be terrible if I wasn't in a sub, so I decided to hold off on that. Considering Icicle Crash doesn't have perfect accuracy, I do get a little unfortunate in that they all land. The crits may have been considered unlucky too, but I think even without them, they would have broke through the sub. Despite all that though, I am able to get Beartic to run out as it switches to using Earthquake. Now I'm very glad I didn't Terra, since the 2 remaining moves are resisted thanks to my grass typing. I guess Grusha doesn't have a particular preference between her 2 final moves, since she uses Aqua Jet. I got quite fortunate with the timing here, since I had selected Spite to use, and I'd much rather be reducing the priority moves PP instead of Earthquake. The following few turns involve a lot of me trying to reduce as many power points with Spite as I can, and making sure I'm always covered by a substitute. Honestly, the gameplay here came down to more of a gut feeling, turn by turn, instead of a solid plan. I do eventually get to a point where I've worn down all of Beartic's moves, and with 4 substitutes left, I know with confidence that I can deal with each struggle, even if there are critical hits among them. After dealing with 2 Pokemon in a row, I think it's time to give Brambleghast a break, so I switch it out for Cloyster, who will take on Titan. Now, first things first, remember that sticky web I set up at the start of the battle? Well, Titan's base speed is 73, and Cloyster's is 70, so the speed drop should make this battle a lot safer. Speaking of safety, let's weigh up what these 2 Pokemon bring to the table. Cloyster is a dual water and ice type, so Titan's moveset looks like this. We have 2 ice type attacks and 1 water type attack. That means that Cloyster takes a quarter of the damage from 2 of the attacks and half the damage from the other. All 3 attacks are physical. Cloyster has outstanding physical defense. To top all of it off, Cloyster comes with the ability Shell Armor, meaning Titan can't even deal extra damage with a critical hit. Going back to the high power point single stat boosting moves, Cloyster will be using Withdraw a lot. The defense boosts will reduce the Titan's damage even further, presumably to the point where each attack was probably only dealing 1 point of damage each time. What follows is a lot of turns where Titan tries to break through my substitute and I just spam whatever move I feel like. You may have seen that I have Leer in my moveset. This has no purpose other than to be a high PP move I can spam to waste more time. The only time I'm concerned here is I don't know when my sub will break, and Titan seems to be leaving the ice shards until the end. Incredibly, the subs last all the way until I start getting hit by Struggle. Being a typeless move, it isn't resisted as well, so it does break my second to last substitute. I use the last one at my disposal, and that's enough to last until Titan knocks itself out. Lastly, we have Altaria. I don't have anything as reliable as Cloyster for this one, but good old Dugtrio can at least put me in a more advantageous state. Once again, I'm going to need to PP stall, so instead of immediately fainting, I use Protect to waste an extra turn of Ice Beam. After that though, I use Memento as usual and bring in Tinkaton. Taking a look at Altaria's moveset, we have Dragon Pulse, which Tinkaton will be immune to thanks to its Fairy type. The other 3 attack types are all resisted by Tinkaton's Steel type, none of which are priority, so even though Tinkaton doesn't come with much of a strong defense as Cloyster, I shouldn't get caught off guard if I'm careful. Furthermore, I naturally outspeed, so I should be able to dictate the flow of the fight. It seems Grusha thinks the best option here is Hurricane. This is great for me for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I see it isn't strong enough to break my sub, so I can set up a light screen, further protecting me from Altaria's array of special attacks. Secondly, it has only 70% accuracy, so there's a good chance a couple will miss, providing me with more free turns to prepare. While I'm trying to waste Altaria's time, I use some Baby Doll Eye attacks. Now this is one of the moves I added simply for its high PP, but Struggle is a physical attack, so it will pay off towards the end of the battle. This isn't like Cloyster versus Titan. Tinkaton will lose its sub a lot quicker, so any chance to reduce incoming damage needs to be taken advantage of. Breaking down the numbers a bit further, the 3 attacks that can actually deal damage to me have a combined power point total of 40. I have 10 protect power points and 10 more for substitute. This essentially means I have a guaranteed protection against half of the attacks Altaria will use. Since we already witnessed that Hurricane won't land every time, I can be pretty confident that I'll survive this battle of attrition as soon as I know that I'm able to tank at least 2 attacks before my sub breaks. You know, barring a few crits. Eventually, I start to see Dragon Pulses being used, so let's just skip past them. As Altaria begins to struggle, I know I'm completely safe with plenty of PP left to deal with any scenario. So with that, the 6th badge is awarded to me. This seems like as good of an opportunity as any to take on another Titan fight. I head over to the desert and fight Great Tusk. Again, being a wild Pokemon battle, there isn't too much to say, but using Pokemon like Slugma and Litwick, it does occur to me that there's potential to abuse their Flame Body abilities in the same way I've abused Glimmer's Toxic Debris. Maybe I'll use that in the future, or maybe not. It isn't a guaranteed thing like Toxic Debris is. Next up, it's time for some double battles as I make my way on over to the Ghost Gym. Once again though, I met with Nemona who would like another battle. After our last battle, I'm not particularly interested in fighting her just yet. Lucky for me, this battle is an isolated event, so I once again come in with just a Dugtrio, ending things immediately with Memento. Sorry Nemona, but I have a feeling our next battle will be an important one. As I began the gym test, I had to adjust my mindset. My team would be fully healed between each battle, so I had to make sure that the 2 Pokemon I started with were malleable enough to deal with each trainer. I decided to go with a strategy that would almost ensure a free switch in each time. Using a level 1 Klefki, I could ensure that I could move first with a Prankster Switcheroo, giving Black Sludge to Grievard. Then, I decided to get in before my opponent could deal damage by exploding with a very fast Pokemon, namely Electrode. Being level 1, Klefki was also guaranteed to faint, but both opposing Pokemon being Ghost meant I dealt no damage to them. See, the explosion example I gave at the start of the video came back around. With the Black Sludge passed over, there was now a timer on Greavard. I just needed to waste time as best I could. I started this process off by bringing in Dugtrio and Cyclizar. Since I knew Greavard wouldn't be any issue for too long, I decided to target down Shuppet with Dugtrio's Memento, hoping any attacks this turn will go into that slot. Cyclizar on the other hand is mainly here to shed tail out for Clefable. Having Cyclizar do this has the added bonus of hopefully persuading my opponent to not use any powerful Ghost type moves into that side. One Clefable safely in means that I now need to make sure my second one is also safe. Fortunately, I do outspeed both my opponent's Pokemon, so I'm able to get the sub without any issue. That said, I now need to be wary of either Clefable getting double targeted. If the first attack breaks the sub, then I'll most likely take damage after the second move. I use Cosmic Power in the hopes that boosting my defences should make things a little more safe. Speaking of safe, the thing I was most concerned about was Ghost type Pokemon using Curse against me. That's why I chose 2 Clefable to be my main Pokemon. Other Pokemon may have had a better type matchup, but even behind substitutes they would have been susceptible to Curse damage. Magic Guard prevents Clefable from taking that kind of damage. This actually turns the main risk factor from a negative to a positive. Not only do I essentially get a free turn, but Curse also halves the user's HP, getting me one step closer to the knockout. Top this off with the fact that Greavard seems fond of using Dig, and my Clefables both run Protect, it wasn't too difficult to wait out the Black Sludge I'd given the Greavard. Even that isn't the end of it when it comes to Clefable's toolkit. Access to Follow Me means that one substitute going down can be dealt with easy enough on the next turn, as the Clefable that's still protected can draw on attacks. Like I said though, I outspeed anyway, but it's nice to know I have that extra layer of safety. One of the Clefable I was using in this fight was actually found in a den and had a Terra type of Steel. I chose to use it in this fight hoping that it would tempt Dig even more. Yes, it would be super effective, but it is a 2-turn move, and in theory I would expect to know who the target of it would be. It's a bit of a shame when Greavard goes down that the audience rewards me with attack boosts that I can't do much with, but I am now in a 2-on-1 situation, so I was pretty confident I could win regardless. I'd established that Shuppet's moveset was made up of Shadow Ball, Roleplay, Sucker Punch and Curse. This meant the only thing my team of Clefables had to worry about at all was Shadow Ball. I could easily stall these out, and after that it would simply be a question of wasting the remaining PP of the other attacks. I am very glad that this and the following 2 trainers only require me to take on 2 Pokemon per battle. I'm pretty happy with the strategy I used here, but I did exhaust all my resources and I'm not sure what I would have done if a third Pokemon had been brought in. Let's race ahead to the end of this battle, since there isn't much to see now. You know, other than Shuppet being forced to use Curse again at some point and therefore bringing itself down to basically no health. This means I only need to tank a single struggle before it knocks itself out. Moving on to the second fight, this was the fight I was most concerned about out of the 3. It just felt like this team had better options to deal with me, considering I had to put together a team that could handle 3 different trainers. I was most scared of Haunter, but unfortunately it being part Poison type meant that I couldn't use the same Black Sludge strategy as last time. Instead, I decided my best bet is to use Klefki's 1 turn to Thunder Wave before Electrode explodes. Some people may be wondering, well why didn't I just give the Black Sludge to the Misdreavus? At least then Haunter would be on its own. Maybe I was just doing something wrong, but in practice it just seemed like a Misdreavus and a paralysed Haunter was more manageable than a healthy lone Haunter. Dugtrio and Cyclizar do the same thing they did last time, bringing in Clefable as I nerf Misdreavus' attack stats. Both opponents' Pokemon waste their first chance at dealing damage to Clefable, and even better, Haunter tried to use Curse. Unlike in the last battle, my Clefable are the slowest Pokemon out now, at least going off base stats. Haunter at least will move slower now thanks to the paralysis. As for the Misdreavus, this is where Follow Me really shines. Since it seems to really want to use Pain Split, the sub Clefable can make it waste its turns. The turn order is crucial here. By using Memento on Misdreavus, it will either waste its turn with a status move, or use an attack that is now unable to break the substitute in one hit. If Haunter was attacking first, it would be able to break the sub, and leave Clefable exposed to a second attack. It was just a matter of time from here until Haunter wouldn't be able to attack due to the paralysis. The free turn gifted to me would mean both Clefable have the chance to use Cosmic Power. This wouldn't do much to stop fixed damage moves like Nightshade, but it should mean going forward that I could tank other attacks better. This was a bit of a tight balancing act. Yes, Haunter missing turns would mean that I could set up more, but it also meant another turn where I used power points without progressing the war of attrition I was trying to pull off. Eventually, one of my Clefable's health gets quite low. Not to the point where I was worried, I was confident enough I could heal back up, but it did prompt the audience to cheer and give me a speed boost. This is much more useful than the boost I got in the last battle. I could actually outspeed the Mischievous now. For a long time in the battle, both Pokemon seemed to only want to use two different attacks. So when I eventually see Mischievous switch things up and use Psybeam, two things occur to me. Firstly, it's probably running out of PP for the other two moves, and secondly, Psybeam must deal less damage, so I should be able to tank it even better. I need to start preparing for the endgame now, and I'm a little concerned my Clefables alone won't be enough. Fortunately though, I do still have one other Pokemon that didn't get knocked out in the setup process. I switched Cyclizar back in while using Follow Me to make sure it gets in safely. This does mean that the Clefable swapped out will lose all its defense buffs, but I think it'll be worth it in the long run. I spend a few turns wasting time with Cyclizar as the other Clefable draws in all the attacks before I switch back and have my second Clefable start setting up again. During this process, Haunter uses a second curse, knocking itself out. This surprised me a little. I thought if it used it again it would fail. I guess it had exactly half of its HP left, so that went much better than I expected. As Clefable number 2 gets its defences back up, I decide once again to Terra. This should make Psybeam sting even less, and it gives me a chance to swap out Clefable 1 for Cyclizar. Again, this doesn't serve a massive purpose other than to save a few power points. It's probably clear at this point that Mischievous itself is no longer any concern to me. I'm just waiting for the inevitable and can switch around as much as needed to buy my Pokemon a few turns of attacks. I cut it a little close in terms of PP, but I eventually get the second knockout thanks to the struggle recoil. The third fight is against MC Sledge, and thankfully he isn't as scary. I can't let my guard down too much, but at least I can go back to my original strategy of giving Drifloon the Black Sludge item. Drifloon didn't seem too happy with that move though, as it also proceeds to blow itself up, leaving just Sableye in the field at the end of turn 1. Okay, well that certainly makes my job a lot easier. Sableye already has relatively low stats, so Dugtrio using Memento and fighting in a 2 against 1 should mean the result of this battle has already been decided. There's no point going over the 30-minute stall fest. Everything established in the previous two fights, the cosmic power and substitutes, the follow me and switching to save PP, the blueprint's already there. We all know how this will end. That was a lot of double battling. Let's take a little break here. Before moving on to the main event, I decided now's as good a time as ever to finish off fighting the Titan Pokemon. Once again, there isn't too much to say about the battle itself, but doing this will make exploring easier once again. On top of that, Arvid is now waiting to battle me. Insert Iron Man meme here, I guess. It was now time to battle Ryme, and although there was only one battle, it would be a double battle where my opponent used more than 2 Pokemon. This is another battle where I think it makes sense to start off by looking at Bayonet's and Mimikyu's movesets. The first thing we notice is that there's 3 priority moves shared between the two. Now yes, one of those is Sucker Punch, which isn't really a threat in this run, but Shadow Sneak could be. This makes Farigiraf a great choice to start with. Its ability Armor Tail negates any priority moves used. That meant that there were 2 damaging moves left to deal with. This is where Frostlass comes in. I can finish shutting Bayonet down by having Frostlass use Imprison. With Icy Wind at its moveset too, Bayonet is now locked out of all attacks. On top of that, being a Ghost type means that Frostlass also takes no damage from Mimikyu's slash attack. Only one attack possibility is left to deal with. Farigiraf can still take damage from Slash. Well, that's the main reason I decided to fight the final Titan just before this. With all the abilities for Koraidon, I was able to travel across the Paldea region, taking on Terra Dens, and eventually I had enough shards to change Farigiraf's Terra type to Ghost. Ryme was completely locked out, but no time to celebrate. I still had to prepare for the rest of the Pokemon. Doing so would require some careful manoeuvring. I needed to switch around, but I didn't want to lose Armor Tail. That's fine though. Frostlass's ability wasn't important to me, so I could simply skill swap Armor Tail over to it. I could swap out now, but both my Pokemon were taking damage from Black Sludge, so I really wanted to deal with that first. It was unfortunate that I got the Omni boost for Terastallizing at a time where I couldn't take damage, but at least I could get started dealing damage early by tricking the first Black Sludge over. There isn't much else for Farigiraf to do in the meanwhile, so it simply uses Growl and continues to take damage. Probably best to take that burden away from it, so I spend the next couple of turns having Frostlass hold the Black Sludge. I wanted to stagger knocking out Pokemon to prevent 2 fresh Pokemon coming in at the same time. This was Farigiraf's cue to leave as I brought in Drifloon. Now, I'd say if there was any Pokemon in my current arsenal that you wouldn't want to be powerless against, it was Drifloon. With no threat to it whatsoever, it was free to set up Minimize, ready to baton pass when needed. Ironically, the biggest threat at this point is Bayonet fainting, since the next Pokemon wouldn't be as locked down. No Clefables this time. Now my duo I planned to take me to the end of the battle with were a couple of Sandygast. I knew once Bayonet went down, a physical attacker would come in, so I wanted a Pokemon that could boost its defense. Now obviously there's a ton of Pokemon that can do that, but we'll look at more specifics when the final Pokemon joins. I took a bit of a gamble bringing Farigiraf back in unprotected, but I needed to reset the Armatil. I did suspect Houndstone would use Phantom Force though, which being a 2-turn move would mean I had a turn to spare. This gave me a chance to bring in Cyclozar, meaning either my sub Sandygast would take the hit, or even better, it does nothing as it tries to hit a normal type. With Houndstone exposed, I can now use Trick again to hand over another Black Sludge. Drifloon comes back in and starts to do Drifloon things, while Houndstone seems perfectly content to keep using Phantom Force. This does hit quite hard, but the 2-turn nature of the move means that Sandygast can safely set back up even though it's a very slow Pokemon. Once Drifloon was sufficiently minimized, I baton passed out to bring in my second Sandygast. All I can do now is wait and hope that the combination of defense and evasion boosts are enough to survive until Houndstone faints. Poor Mimikyu was still just sat there watching as its teammates are being taken out. Toxtricity is the final Pokemon to come in, and at first glance my first Sandygast is in a poor state. It lost a significant amount of health to the substitutes in Black Sludge and has no recovery available. Ryme tries to start things strong with a Terra Ghost Hex, and although it missed, it didn't really matter. Sandygast number 2 follows up with Imprison. Knowing Hex as well means that Toxtricity will have to resort to one of its other attacks. What are those other attacks exactly? An electric type and a normal type, neither of which can do a point of damage to a ground ghost type Pokemon. This fight is over now. There's nothing that either of Ryme's remaining Pokemon can do to me. In fact, it's so dire that Toxtricity's discharge will only hurt Mimikyu. As usual, all that was left to do was for me to kill time until Toxtricity ran out of PP. Even when it came down to using Struggle, I'd used Harden so many times that it was going to be practically impossible to break through the sub with a weak physical attack. That was an interesting challenge, but I'd say it's probably for the best to get back to the one-on-one battles. With 7 badges under my belt and no more Titans to battle, there was only one place left to visit. So I went on over to Alfornada. Coming off a fight where I was pretty pleased with the strategy I'd come up with, this one was a bit weird. Typically with most battles so far, I'd come in with a rough idea of a strategy, observed when it failed, and then took it on again with a more refined version. With this particular gym, it made sense to me to start off with some Dark-type Pokemon. Grimmsnarl seemed to make the most sense since it also came with Prankster ability, and basically all the moves I've used so far have been stats moves. One of the moves Grimmsnarl gets access to is Swagger, so my plan was, instead of waiting for the power points to run out, maybe I could just chain together enough confusion self-damage for a quicker win. A few turns pass against Gothorita, and although my choice to bring Confide was a poor one, since the competitive ability turns this negative into a positive, I wasn't getting attacked at all. It would appear the only damaging moves Gothorita had access to were Psychic type. Eventually all the Swaggers mean that Gothorita's attack stat is maxed out, and any confusion damage dealt at this point will cost a pretty large chunk of health. Because this was essentially a test run, I hadn't considered that using Bulk Up would slow things down if Gothorita used Psych Up and copied my defense boosts. It doesn't cause too many issues here, but if anyone is wondering why this fight in particular felt rough around the edges, that hopefully makes things a bit clearer. Curlier comes in next, and at this point I don't see any reason not to stick with the same strategy, so I begin using Swaggers again to start racking up confusion damage. Curlier seems content to just spend turns using Carmine and not attacking. Terrible type coverage in this gym so far. Eventually, Grimmsnarl runs out of Swagger PP, so I bring in Spiritomb. a Pokemon I chose because I thought its pressure ability would make PP stalling a little less painful if I had to resort to it, but also because I assumed there would be some fighting type coverage attacks somewhere. In order to save power points, my plan from here was going to be use a confusing attack whenever Curlier wasn't confused, and then the rest of the time just switch back and forth so that I didn't needlessly waste any extra attacks. It isn't long though until Curlier knocks itself out and I can start to focus on fight number 2. Unlike the Ghost Gym, my Pokemon aren't healed between battles, but health wise we were at full health when the previous battle ended, so it wasn't a terrible position to be in. That said, this battle probably showcases what I was saying about poor preparation the most. This Grumpig had quite an annoying moveset. The coverage move wasn't so bad, but having rest meant I was probably less likely to win with a confusion approach. That was fine though. I could resort to the longer stall strategy I was more used to. It was Grumpig's final attack though that would make that a poor choice too. Snow is a move that can only be used while asleep and deals sound type damage, much like Frostmoth could do a few gym battles ago. In retrospect, maybe it would have been worth considering a soundproof Pokemon again, but I decided to go with a different approach. Using Dugtrio and Cyclizar to safely bring in Klefki, I switch a Black Sludge over to Grumpig. Of course, Black Sludge deals damage slowly, so there will be plenty of chances for Grumpig to use Rest and move on to Snow. Thankfully, Imprison is my saviour once again. By putting Rest on my moveset, I can essentially block 2 of Grumpig's moves by imprisoning Rest. The downside to all this is that because I had to give Klefki a Black Sludge, I had no means of passive recovery, the likes of which I'd normally get from leftovers. This would really limit the number of times I could substitute. Thankfully, Klefki's steel typing meant that both Psyshock and Power Gem were not very effective, and they were coming off a special attack stat that had already been debuffed by Memento. This meant it took quite a long time to break a sub. Thankfully, I don't get caught by any unfortunate critical hits and Grumpig goes down. Medicham's in next, and a physical attacker is a perfect opportunity for me to use the Glimmora Endure strategy. Even better, Medicham is using High Jump Kick, so either it will miss, crash and injure itself, or it'll help me set the stage for the final Pokemon. Oh, wait a minute. What's Glimmora's max HP? Yeah, 124 does not have a remainder of 1 when divided by 4. I forgot to get the health stat right before the battle. Well, okay, Medicham has a setup move, so I need to switch Pokemon before things get out of hand. Thankfully, I've learned my lesson from previous battles and instead of switching, I taught Glimmora Memento for a much cleaner getaway. I didn't need to be as worried about switching this particular time though, as I still have Spiritomb available, and I'm pretty sure the only attacking moves are going to be Psychic and Fighting type. I go for Confuse Ray to try and get some confusion damage, but in retrospect this was a poor idea. I know Medicham at some point will have to resort to using High Jump Kick, which will always fail and deal recall damage against Spiritomb. Oh well, at least I have Spite to get through these annoying Acupressure, Power Trip and Psych Up moves much quicker. I can't even keep track at this point which stats have been raised and by how much, but I guess it doesn't really matter. Once again, it's just a matter of time before Medicham faints, but my PP management on Spiritomb was a bit of a concern getting ready for the final Pokemon. I was expecting this last fight to be less than 10 turns with the poison damage. I needed to adjust my plan. DDD comes in last and starts spamming Calm Mind. Was this seriously another Pokemon that didn't have any coverage move to hit me? It's a shame Spiritomb didn't have much left to offer, but I do keep it in for as long as possible in the hopes to either deal more confusion damage or waste more PP with its pressure ability. Eventually though, I have no other move to use other than Memento. My roster has certainly seen better days, but I bring Cyclizar back in so that I can Shed Tail once again thanks to a bit of healing. I still have my Grimmsnarl from the previous fight, but it's also running pretty low on all of its moves. I waste as much time with Grimmsnarl as I feel comfortable, and then take a gamble to bring in my other Pokemon. Now I'm not 100% sure here that DDD didn't have other coverage moves, but I seem to be safe as Cyclizar is able to get its health over to half, meaning I can use Shed Tail one more time. I burned through Grimmsnarl's remaining power points, but it isn't enough, and DDD isn't done yet, and I can't use Struggle since that will deal damage. With no other Pokemon left with enough health to set up a sub, I resort to a bit of a desperate strategy. Cyclizar comes back in and I need to get it back to half health before it gets attacked. Only problem is, I've not counted how many power points have been used so far, so Struggle could be used at any time. Thankfully, I do still have access to some protects, so I can keep myself safe at least some of the time. Turns out though there was still time to spare, and I shed tail one last time bringing in my last Pokemon. As I previously mentioned though, Klefki doesn't have leftovers, so if its sub breaks before Struggle knocks Indeedee out, I won't have enough health to set up another one. I go for a desperation rest to get my health back, fully aware that I may be exposed while Klefki is asleep. But incredibly the original sub was strong enough to withstand all the attacks and the final Pokemon faints. I got very lucky there, but don't worry, I have a better game plan prepared for the main battle. Going into the final gym battle, I actually only brought 3 Pokemon with me. I had a straightforward plan, and for the first time in a while, the battle didn't seem too chaotic. I began the fight as I had done many times already in this run, with a Glimmora that this time was prepared to get down to 1 HP. Taking a look at Farigiraf's moveset, there's 3 physical attacks and Reflect. Any of the damaging moves would do exactly as I needed, so I began spamming Substitute. It isn't long before Glimmora is ready to use Endure, setting the Toxic Spikes on the field. What's more is that with no way to use priority moves, I don't have to worry about Farigiraf stopping me from following up with a Memento. This provided me the perfect opportunity for my next Pokemon. I bring in Umbreon and get to work PP stalling. Farigiraf's main stab of course can deal no damage to Umbreon. The only other options, being a resisted Crunch and a fairly unimpressive Headbutt, mean that not only can I stall Farigiraf easily, but I can also start boosting my own stats with Calm Mind. One mistake I did make was bringing the move Baby Doll Eyes as opposed to Charm or Growl. At the time I was choosing the moveset, I didn't give it much thought among the 3, but I forgot that being a priority move, Baby Doll Eyes would get blocked by Armor Tail. This was unfortunate, but it was already pretty clear that even without the extra debuffs, Farigiraf was having a hard time breaking through Umbreon's great natural bulk. Now, it would have been easy enough for Umbreon to deal with Farigiraf on its own, but there were some Fairy type moves coming up from later Pokemon, and I was paranoid about something Gardevoir may do. With maxed out special defense buffs, I bat and pass out Umbreon for the main attraction for this fight, Gliscor. There are plenty of reasons why I made this choice, so while I continue to stall out Farigiraf, let's break them down. Gliscor already has good physical bulk, but it comes with access to Harden, a high PP move that I can waste time with and build my physical defense up to match my special defense buffs. Moves like Sand Attack and Agility round out its moveset nicely, as I can take full control of the battle, knowing I'll be able to outspeed anything, and any turns Tulip's Pokemon take will deal next to no damage, or even better, miss completely. Access to a Terra Steel type means that I can resist the vast majority of moves used by Tulip's entire team. In fact, looking back at the footage now, I'm not sure why I didn't immediately Terastallize. Not that I was getting much grief anyway, but still that was probably a wasted opportunity. Lastly, as Farigiraf knocks itself out with Struggle, there's one more reason why Gliscor was the perfect Pokemon here. The raid battle where I found this, originally Gligar, gave it its hidden ability Poison Heal. As Gardevoir swapped in, it was poisoned by the Toxic Spikes. I was expecting its synchronized ability to kick in and poison Gliscor too, providing me with even more free healing. What I learned though was that being behind a substitute protects you from this little interaction. Oh well, nothing lost really here, and it's nice to know if Farigiraf had broken the sub on its last turn, I would have still been safe. Since there isn't too much left to talk about in this battle, given Gliscor is practically immortal now, let's talk about the next phase of the game. Anyone remotely familiar with Pokemon games will know that with 8 badges in hand, the next challenge is to take on the Elite Four. Including the champion battle that follows, that's 5 battles I have to beat in a row. Now, unlike previous Pokemon games, I do have the ability to change my party between each battle, so I don't have to try and come up with a strategy that works for 5 very different trainers. But as far as I'm aware, I don't have the ability to go away and catch any Pokemon between the fights. This means that although I can change my team at any time, those team changes have to come from my boxes of Pokemon that I've already caught. Since the fights are clearly going to take a long time each, I don't want to get through 3 or so battles and realise I have nothing that will work against the final couple of trainers. That means I'm going to need to spend a lot of time going around Paldea gathering as many resources as possible. So, as I mentioned earlier, if I use strategy against the Elite Four that would have... Since the fights are clearly going to take a long time each, I don't want to get through 3 or so battles and realise I have nothing that will work well against the final couple of trainers. This means I'm going to need to spend a lot of time going around Paldea gathering as many resources as possible. So, as I mentioned earlier, if I use a strategy against the Elite Four that would have helped in earlier battles, just know I had a lot of time to think about those later battles. Alright, it's time to get started with Rika, who specialises in ground type Pokemon. This immediately rules out any Sandstream shenanigans, but that's fine. That strategy was kind of a pain to maintain. Maybe this kind of challenge in a pre-Gen 6 title could have made better use of that. At face value, starting off against a ground team with a Minun seems like a terrible idea, but that's exactly what I plan to use to my advantage. The obvious choice of attack means I can Terra Flying my Minun and avoid any damage from the Earth power. That's all I need now, since I can switch through my Choice Scarf over. This completely locks Whiscash into a ground type attack. With complete freedom to do whatever I want, Minun starts setting up, in particular trying to raise his special defense as high as possible. Once that stat's maxed out, I go ahead and bat and pass out for Rotom. I had a choice between Rotom Wash and Rotom Heat when I was setting up this team. It didn't really make a difference for what I needed it for, so I went with Heat since I feel the Wash gets more attention. Rotom does its initial job of wearing down Whiscash well, but after that I'm caught off guard by who Rika wants to bring out next. Every gym leader I'd fought during the game brought out the Pokemon next in order they're listed on their team, so I expected Camerupt to come up next. This is why I spent so much time preparing my special defense, something that'll be useless against Donphan. I guess it makes sense though that the Elite Four would be smarter and more likely to bring in a Pokemon with a better matchup. This was a bit of a setback, but it wasn't something I couldn't recover from. So I bring Dugtrio in instead to do what it's been doing best throughout this whole run. Donphan can still hit decently hard though, so I want to double down on the attack debuffs with Intimidate. Obviously there are quite a lot of Pokemon with Intimidate as their ability, but Masquerain in particular has some other useful aspects. Ironically, the first advantage of using Masquerain is its poor bug and flying typing. This is just too tempting not to use Stone Edge against, which means I can sub and protect Stall to waste Stone Edge's low power point value. Once the most concerning attack was out of the way, Masquerain could tank at least one of any other attack without losing its sub thanks to all the attack debuffs. This meant I had the opportunity to start setting up some agility boosts. Clearly Masquerain wasn't having any issues outspeeding, but my key piece in this fight could certainly use some assistance in the speed department. Once the agility stat was maxed out, I waited for the opportunity to pass them alongside a sub and bring in Bronzong. Now, Bronzong may have needed some assistance with a speed boost, but it's probably one of the best options when it comes to tanking attacks. In fact, let's take a look at Donphan's moveset. We already know that it's exhausted all of its Stone Edge usage, so what's left? Poison Jab won't do anything against the Steel type. Earthquake won't do anything since Bronzong's ability is Levitate. Even Iron Head will be resisted, doing next to nothing as I build my defense up even further with Iron Defense. I plan to use Bronzong to tank and survive against the majority of the remaining Pokemon. Clearly it has the capability, even without leftovers recovery, to not get worn down. But what about PP management? That's where its item Leopard Berry comes in. Once I run out of power points for a move, the Leopard Berry will be consumed and restore 10 power points. In the grand scheme of things, 10 extra power points probably doesn't seem like much, which is true, but Bronzong also learns Recycle, meaning it can replace any item it consumes to use again. That means I can actually squeeze another 100 attacks out of the Leopard Berry. In fact, I'm pretty sure if things were getting extremely dire with regards to PP management, I could use the Leopard Berry to restore Recycle's PP, effectively giving me infinite power points. Of course, there are bigger issues with that, namely if I did actually have to resort to that, HP management would become a concern eventually. But I still think it's quite a cool combination, at least for this challenge. I imagine it's a massive pain if you come across something like this in competitive play. After Donphan goes down, Camerupt actually does come in this time, so I'm forced to bring in a Rotom that hasn't received boosts. Once again though, if we look at Camerupt's moveset, we can see we don't have too much to worry about. Rotom is another Pokemon with Levitate, so Earth Power won't be able to do anything. Flash Cannon is double resisted thanks to my Electric and Fire typing, so it's really only Fire Blast that could be an issue, since I only resist that with one of my types. Thankfully though, Camerupt wasted its first turn using Yawn, which meant I was able to use Charge with Rotom, boosting my special defense to a point where a single Fire Blast can't break through my sub. Even if it could break through, it has such a small amount of power points that I could have probably just survived with substitute spam. But evidently I am tanky enough, which means I can now alternate between Charge and Double Team, making me progressively harder to damage. Much like Explosion before, I do use a damaging attack here, but obviously Thundershock won't do any damage to Camerupt. I just like the idea of using different moves after a whole story of me using a lot of the same attacks over and over again. Clearly I could have swapped this attack out for something like Protect. It wasn't Rotom's job though to completely wear out Camerupt. I just needed the Flash Cannon and Fire Blast attacks to be used up so that I could bring Masquerain back in. Annoyingly, the switch in does leave me exposed for one turn, during which Camerupt is able to use Yawn. In the grand scheme of things, it didn't really matter, it just meant I had to wait a few turns to wake up before I could continue setting up. Since I didn't need to worry about taking damage this time, I was able to get set up much faster once awake, and Baton passed out once again for Bronzong. Bronzong getting back in nice and early means there's plenty of time to set up 3 iron defences, maxing out its defence stat. It isn't long before Camerupt is forced to struggle. There are now 2 Pokemon left, but you know what? I'm going to show them both at the same time. You can watch either fight and you'll probably see something similar. If you don't believe me, well, feel free to watch the video twice. I certainly wouldn't complain about the extra view. Let's break down the moves once again, and you'll see why I was so confident in Bronzong for this battle. Firstly, I should say that unlike the other battles up until now, I went out of my way to EV train all of my Pokemon. So for example, Bronzong's being trained in defence. That said, I didn't realise until later that I'd forgotten to use the nature changing mints, so if anyone out there is an expert in damage calculations and something seems off, it's probably because I'm using an unfavourable nature. Anyway, starting with Dugtrio, it does technically have 3 damage dealing attacks. Even if they could all deal damage, I wouldn't be too worried, but once again, Earthquake is one of those attacks that, as previously mentioned, Bronzong simply levitates above. Rock Slide could be annoying, but it's resisted by Bronzong and it's not the most accurate thing anyway. The third attack is Sucker Punch. Now this is both a priority attack and a Dark type move, i.e. it would be super effective against Bronzong. These 2 features in any other attack may have been cause for concern, but since it'll always fail if it precedes a status attack, it's trivial to deal with in this challenge. The final move is Sandstorm. Although setting this up does trigger Dugtrio's sand availability, Bronzong's Steel type means it won't be taking damage, nor will its substitute. And it's not like Sandveil would affect me anyway, as I did need to do anything to Dugtrio other than to wait for it to take itself out. The second battle with Poppy started off quite tricky. Copperajah can hit quite hard, but that's not what was concerning me. In its moveset it had access to the move Stealth Rock. If it was able to get that set up, there would be extremely few options for me to switch into. I didn't want to plan my whole team around avoiding damage every time I needed to bring something in. That meant I would need something to stop them from being set up in the first place. Now, I could have tried to use a Taunt Pokemon, but I had something else in mind. An Eevee I found in a den had access to its hidden ability, meaning if I evolved it into an Espeon, I could take advantage of Magic Bounce, sending the rocks back and providing me with some chip damage each time Poppy switched instead. By starting things off with Cyclozar and switching in Espeon through Shedtail, I expected to see one of 2 moves used. The first was Play Rough. Makes sense, a fairy type attack for a dragon type Pokemon. If this had been the case, I'd just have to have hoped for the 10% miss chance. The better scenario, and the one that actually happened, was Stealth Rocks, which as I already mentioned I'd planned for. Now, I didn't expect Espeon to be able to take a hit well. I decided Terra Water, since that would at least reduce the damage caused by Copperajah's highest power move in Heavy Slam. I used my first free turn in order to use Sand Attack. In previous attempts, I learned that an attack debuff wasn't enough to stop my sub being broke in one hit, so I'd need to rely on luck a little bit more here. By making Heavy Slam less appealing, Copperajah is focused on moves that were already less than 100% accurate, so it isn't too long before there are some misses and I'm able to start using Growl, which eventually will mean I can take at least one attack. It's a bit of a ropey start, but eventually I take control of the fight, with most attacks missing or Stealth Rocks being sent back. I was pleased this was the case, but I did have a backup plan if worst came to worst. On my team, I also have a Corviknight that could learn Defog, so I could have dealt with Stealth Rocks if my regular strategy wasn't working by giving it heavy duty boots. Magnezone's up next, and I don't think I should be keeping in a now water type Pokemon for this one. I'm able to bank another free turn by baton passing over to Palossand. Much like back in the Ghost Gym, I've used Palossand because it leaves Magnezone with only one attack that can even deal damage. Flash Cannon's 10 power points could be easily stalled out with a combination of Protect and substitutes. I'd learned in previous attempts that Magnezone really wants to keep a light screen up at all times. This meant that any turn after light screen had run out, I knew I had a chance to boost Palossand's defense with Harden. Once the flash cannons had ran out and my defense was at max, I was able to stall out the ineffective moves much quicker by using Spite each turn. Honestly, I'm so happy that move was added back in the Teal Mask DLC. Yes, they made the Store Wars more bearable, but crucially in many battles, they helped me to ensure that my total power points would actually be able to outlast my opponents. The third Pokemon to come in was Corviknight, and as much as I'd love to stay in and make the most of my defense boosts, I decided to go for a different approach and bring in Cyclizar. I used its Shed Tail to bring Rotom in, and in doing so, I'd unknowingly covered my biggest worry for this fight. As you've seen many times in this video, my plan for a lot of the Pokemon is to make them run out of power points. Corviknight may have been potentially a lot more tricky with this, since its pressure ability should mean I'd be eating through my attacks a lot quicker. After doing some research later though, I found out that Substitute provides more bonuses than I'd initially realised. Pressure won't affect a Pokemon that's behind one, and since I plan to spend most of my turns in that state, the PP management wasn't as big of a concern. Other than the whole pressure thing, Corviknight actually comes with something else I haven't really seen too much of this run, a setup move. Now the setup move is Iron Defense, a stat boosting move that raises a stat that doesn't really bother me when I'm playing defensive anyway. But Corviknight does also know the move Body Press. This fighting type attack gets a boost in damage if the user's defense stat is boosted. Obviously this could be a serious problem, since after a few boosts, Corviknight could probably blow past any substitute I set up with ease. That's what prompted me to use a Ghost type for this battle. Rotom in particular seemed favourable, since its other electric typing would mean that every attack used against me would not be very effective at best. Rotom is still quite frail though, so once again I resort to evasion strats, spamming double team as much as possible. While I definitely liked the fact I was dodging attacks, it wasn't the worst thing in the world when a Brave Bird would land. The recoil damage, combined with the fact Stealth Rocket already dealt some damage at the start, meant that Corviknight was wearing itself down quite a lot before we even got to struggle. After Corviknight, I'm greeted with the MVP from the previous battle, Bronzong. This one's much less of a stall Pokemon though, sporting 4 physical attacks. Again, I wasn't sure how the interaction worked with Substitute, so I brought my Corviknight in equipped with a Rocky Helmet. As I watch Bronzong's attacks bounce off without taking any residual damage, it becomes clear I'll just have to wear it down the same way I've done with the others. That wasn't so bad though, since my Corviknight also has the pressure ability, and it was actually taking effect each turn. On top of that, Corviknight's typing once again means that 3 out of the 4 attacks Bronzong could use were nothing at all to worry about. The 4th attack however I was constantly on edge over. Rock Blast isn't the hardest hitting move, and I'd had time early on in this fight to set up iron defences, meaning the attack was more like Pebble Blast. The problem was that with it being a multi-hit move, I had no idea how much damage I'd take each turn, and how many times I would be taking damage. I just really had to hope that my substitute wouldn't break at the wrong time. Or even better, hope that the turns where I used Protect were the turns where Bronzong decided to use Rock Blast. All that being said, I did only have to get round it being used 5 times, and I could even try and be a little clever with Roost. Using it immediately after I reset a substitute would mean that Corviknight became grounded, losing its flying typing. This would demote Rock Blast from a regular damaging move to a not very effective move. My luck holds out as Bronzong does get through all its PP without dealing any damage, and that just left me with Tinkaton. Once again, I use Cyclizar to get things going. Yes, the Shed Tail is handy, but the Dragon typing also does a good job of baiting in a Fairy type attack. This makes it easy to switch in Revroom as the attack just bounces off it. Going into this match, I was a little concerned that Revroom was going to be outsped by Tinkaton. I did have the move Shift Gear ready, so it would only be an issue for the first few turns. But it turns out that wasn't even needed. Looking at the stats, Tinkaton has a base speed of 94, whereas Revroom only has a base speed of 90. That said, I did make sure to EV train it to have as much speed as possible. I wasn't sure how the Elite Four's Pokemon were EV'd or what natures they had, but I guess speed wasn't a major focus for this Tinkaton. This would be another fight where a physical attacker was taking on one of my Pokemon that knew Iron Defense. Also, the moveset did not match up well against me. 3 attacks are resisted, and even though Brick Brick wasn't, its relatively low base power and lack of stab means it probably was going to do less than something like Gigaton Hammer. Speaking of which, even though that is a very high power attack, its drawback of not being usable 2 turns in a row meant it couldn't really back me into a corner. The battle with Larry I'm pretty sure was the longest battle of the entire run. No sense using Toxic Spikes against a flying team. Maybe I could have tried out some more switcheroo shenanigans, but instead I landed on some interesting strategies, if I do say so myself. Dugtrio actually played a bit more of a role this time instead of just being a memento machine. I mean, obviously I had it use memento eventually, but it was able to provide some more setup before that. Having a ground type out, I assumed Tropius would want to do one of two things. It would either want to fire off a solar beam, or it would want to set up a sunny day, so that future solar beams wouldn't need to charge. Either way, this meant I would be able to get a free turn somewhere to use a sand attack. A few power points wasted later, I then use Memento and bring in Tyranitar. Doing so means a couple things. Firstly, it's another grass weak Pokemon, so Tropius should want to continue using Solar Beam. Secondly, Tyranitar's Sandstream ability will kick in, setting up the Sandstorm. Tropius is obviously going to want to reset the sun, so this gives me a turn to prepare. Also, the chip damage from the one turn of sand is appreciated. After resetting the sun, I was left with a problem. I didn't want to try and switch Tyranitar out and back in. Yes, Tropius had an accuracy debuff, but I didn't fancy my chances of trying to do this over and over again. And it's not like I could use the move Sandstorm, since this would break one of my rules in the challenge. This left me to resort to an option that I assume has never been used on a Tyranitar set before. I set up a Rain Dance. Honestly, I have no idea why Tyranitar, the Pokemon that made Sandstream famous, learns Rain Dance, but it's cool that I get to use it here. Now, unlike Sandstorm, Rain Dance doesn't boost my special defense, but changing the weather does more than just messing with Solar Beam's charge time. Tropius has the ability Chlorophyll, boosting its speed whenever the sun's out. This wasn't exactly an issue for Dugtrio, since it has speed to spare, but Tyranitar isn't exactly the fastest Pokemon out there. Lucky for me, since Tyranitar's ability shut off the sun the first time, I had more power points in Rain Dance than Tropius did in Sunny Day, meaning I could win the weather war in the long run. It takes some patience, but eventually I'm able to exhaust all of the sunny days. This meant that anytime Tropius wanted to use Solar Beam from then on, it would have to announce it the turn before, giving me the warning to use Protect on my next turn. Tropius' two remaining moves are Air Slash, an attack that Tyranitar resists and is naturally not even 100% accuracy, and Dragon Pulse, a non-stab attack that is using Tropius' pretty underwhelming special attack. Needless to say, the rest of the first encounter wasn't too bad. Staraptor is a pretty hard-hitting Pokemon, so I decided to bring in another Dugtrio to apply a nerf before switching over to Mimikyu. So that's 4 of my Pokemon used already to take on Larry's first 2 Pokemon. The numbers don't look too great there, but I've got something better planned for my final 2 Pokemon. As for this fight, I wasn't actually sure if my EV trained Mimikyu would outspeed here, so its first turn it may have taken a Brave Bird. It wasn't the case here, but I was preparing to justify why that was okay. If the attack had hit Mimikyu, that would have activated its Disguise ability. According to the ability on Cerebi, the Pokemon with this ability can withstand one damaging attack without receiving any damage. Then, it seems to suggest that the ability is the thing to deal the 1/8 max hit point damage. Like I said, I didn't need to worry about this grey area, but what do you think? Would this have been acceptable given the rules of this challenge? Going back to what actually did happen though, being a ghost type Pokemon meant that 2 moves in Staraptor's moveset could not damage me. Of the remaining 2 attacks, one of those moves was Thief. That's why I specifically chose Mimikyu here. Its secondary fairy typing stopped the dark attack from being super effective. The disguise thing was just an added bonus. I had been pleasantly surprised in this fight with Staraptor's first move. Thief was a much weaker option, meaning it couldn't break a sub and give me a chance to start applying attack debuffs. I wonder what would have happened if Brave Bird had been used instead. Thinking back, didn't Larry misplay with his Staraptor when I fought him in the normal gym? I like the character and the Pokemon, so I won't judge them too harshly. Double team and attack debuffs make it manageable enough to stall out the 2 damaging attacks, despite their relatively high PP, compared to other moves that have been used by the Elite Four. Mimikyu did a good job dealing with Staraptor, but it pretty much exhausted all of its power points as well. So it was time to let my 2 aces take over from here. Altaria coming in third was exactly what I needed, so I brought in my Dash Button. Let's get that moveset list up again. What's immediately clear is Dragon Pulse will do nothing against my Fairy type, meaning that the only stab move is covered. But that's nothing to get too excited about. There's been plenty of fights where I had a favourable type matchup. The more important move is Flamethrower. If Dash Button gets hit by that, it'll trigger its well-baked body ability, sharply boosting its defense. I'm not sure if the AI is aware of this straight away, but the Altaria seems to be focused on using the move Moonblast over and over again, That's fine, I can tank them pretty well already, but I have another Pokemon that may do an even better job of it. I'm a big fan of Oricorio, so I was happy I got to use it in this challenge. I was less happy about the fact that the turn I decided to switch it in was the turn Altaria finally decided to use Flamethrower. I actually caught this Oricorio in its fire form and changed it to its electric form. Doing so meant I could bait in a super effective Ice Beam, changing into a fire type since the terror remained the same and take minimal damage, giving me a free turn. Being a fire type had the added benefit of now me resisting Flamethrower and Moonblast. I spent some time using Quiver Dance to boost my special stats and speed, but once I was happy with that, I decided to take advantage of the fact that Altaria had switched to Dragon Pulse for an excuse to bring Dash Burn back in. Now the mind games could begin. Altaria, seeing Dragon Pulse do nothing, would obviously prompt it to use another attack, any of which would not be very effective as I bat and passed out again to bring Oricorio back. I'd repeat this process a few times and eventually Altaria started throwing Flamethrower into the mix. This was just the opportunity I'd waited for. This would give me a chance to max out both of my defences. What's even better is usually when I'd bat and pass my moveset, I've only used it a couple times. Here, it was how I was spending most of my turns. I could finally make the most of its massive power point value to aid me in stalling out more and more turns. Altaria is completely helpless against Pokemon that can pass about maxed out speed and defences, so we can move on to Oricorio. This may be another one where I have to defend myself, but I really enjoyed what happens here. I pass back to my Oricorio for the mirror match as Larry's Oricorio opens up with Revelation Dance. Obviously I take the hit easily, but that was a special type attack, and a one that falls into the dancing category. This means that my dancer ability kicks in immediately, responding with a Revelation Dance of my own. And thanks to all those Quiver Dances earlier on, mine hits much harder, getting the 1-8 KO. This may beg the question, did Oricorio not just use a damaging attack? I'd argue no. I don't have Revelation Dance in my moveset, so I couldn't have selected that as an attack. I'd say this is more like Sandstream, where an attack's being transformed into a passive ability. While I try and defend myself from angry comments, Flamigo has come in as the final Pokemon. And to be honest, it hasn't come into a great situation. I still have maxed out stats, and the Pokemon that preceded it didn't do much in terms of wearing down my PP. I guess it does have Liquidation in its moveset, so if Oricorio comes back in at the wrong time, that could be a little scary. But let's face it, Dash Burn isn't going to need much help here. To really rub salt into the wound, I still have plenty of Growl power points left to lower Flamigo's attack, and thus take even less damage from its fully physical attack moveset. Larry does make the smart choice of trying to use Throat Chop, which I'm pretty sure would negate my Growl attacks, but of course that won't work through a substitute. While my overall PP management isn't a concern, I am running a little low on substitutes, so I decided to pass back over to Oricorio. At this point, a -6 attack into a +6 defense shouldn't be a concern, even if it's super effective. Again, the main issue here is that Oricorio is also running pretty low on substitute PP. That's fine though, surely if I bring Dash Burn in one last time, I should be able to solo out the remainder of Flamigo's attacks. I guess Flamigo wants to go down swinging though, as it immediately crits my second to last sub. I'm a little wary as I use Dash Burn's last substitute, but then I remember that at the start of the fight, Tyranitar didn't use all of its PP. I bat and pass over to it instead this time, knowing full well that if I have to switch again, I won't be able to hold on to my stat boosts. The Sandstorm chip damage is a nice addition though, as it combined with the earlier recall from Brave Birds brings Flamigo under half HP. It quickly becomes clear that Flamigo's only remaining attack is Throat Chop, the worst option for it to use against Tyranitar, so it isn't difficult for Tyranitar to sit there and stall out the final few turns. The last Elite Four member is Hassel, a Dragon Specialist. So you know what that means, Fairy types are about to come in clutch. The Plusle that I start with isn't a Fairy type, but that's kind of the reason why I brought it in. Noivern could prove to be quite a pain, so I needed to have a very specific strategy to deal with it. Firstly, by bringing in a Pokemon whose type doesn't resist Dragon, I expect Dragon Pulse to be used. This gives me a chance, much like I did with Minun, to Terrasilize into a Fairy type that is immune and lock Noivern in by using Switcheroo to pass the Choice Scarf. Unlike the previous time I used this strategy, I'm not in the clear just yet. Noivern has access to the ability Infiltrator. This means that even if I set up a substitute in preparation for struggle later, I'll still take damage from Noivern's attack. To get around this, I have Plusle use Skill Swap. Its own ability is completely pointless in a single battle, so I'm more than happy to hand it over. One last thing I need from Plusle before it bows out is to lower Noivern's attack so that it's less likely to break my next Pokemon substitute. That Pokemon is Tinkaton. Of course its Fairy type means Dragon type moves won't affect it, but weirdly its second typing doesn't put hassle off from bringing on Dragalge next. If I didn't make it clear there, Dragalge has a pretty poor set of options to take me on here. Sludge Bomb and Dragon Pulse are useless of course, but even the other two moves aren't causing me a great deal of concern. Don't get me wrong, Hydro Pump and Thunderbolt are usually great moves, but Hydro Pump only has 5 power points and 80% accuracy. On top of that, Dragalge is extremely slow, which means I have an easy opportunity to set up a light screen before even tanking an attack. Having Protect on my moveset as well means it would take an extraordinary amount of bad luck to take any kind of damage here. Nice having one battle where I'm in the driver's seat from the start. After previous battles, I can appreciate the fact that I did need to use all of my substitutes and console the ineffective attacks with other status moves. At least then, if any of the other Pokemon cause me more grief, I have a Pokemon ready to come back in and take some of the heat off. Haxorus was Hassle's next choice. It makes sense, definitely seems to have the best attacking options to take on my Tinkaton, but I wanted to save Flapple and Baxcalibur until last, so this worked out perfectly for me. Haxorus is a little too speedy for my next choice though, so Cyclizar gets things started. Once again, its Dragon typing proves to be more useful than you'd think, since Haxorus naturally wants to use Dragon Claw. Even with its high attack stat, this isn't enough to break through a resisted King Gambit, which has its defense EV maxed out. Crucially here, I've also maxed out King Gambit's speed stat. I'm much slower than Haxorus, so I need that free turn afforded to me to use Scary Face. This is enough to push me ahead in terms of speed, so I can now more comfortably start setting up my own substitutes. Now when most people think of King Gambit, myself included, they probably think of its signature ability Supreme Overload. Even if you didn't think of that, you're probably thinking of its ability Defiant. You know, something that enhances its firepower even further. Neither of these abilities would do me much good though, but there is a third option. Pressure is probably one of the best abilities I could come across in a playthrough where I'm constantly PP stalling, so it's a good thing that it's coming up more against the strongest trainers in the region. Even with my resistances, Haxorus can do a decent job of breaking through my defences, so much so that I'm worried 10 substitute power points won't be enough. That's why for the first time this run, I've used a couple of PP ups. Realistically I would have liked to have used these a lot more, but in all my adventures around Paldea, I was only able to come across 4 or 5. This meant I really had to ration them, but this seemed like one of the best times to use it. Honestly, if I didn't know any better, I'd say Haxorus had an ability that increases its critical hit chance, because it manages to pull them out a lot in this fight. Actually, you know what? It's funny, I didn't even think about this until right now writing about Haxorus. It has the ability Mold Breaker. Was pressure even in effect during this fight? It's too long of a fight for me to go back and count the turns, and I guess it doesn't really matter now. There's another issue with speed when it comes to the next battle, so it's going to take a little bit more setup. If I get it right though, it should set me up for the final 2 Pokemon. Cyclizar swaps out for Oricorio, but this isn't the final stop. Leech Seed is another really good attack, but a terrible choice to use when I'm subbed, so I reap the benefits as Oricorio to set up an agility. There's no sense using Quiver Dance this time, since the 2 Pokemon left are physical attackers, and there won't be any dance style moves for me to steal. I bat and pass out the speed boost and bring in Azumarill. This is another Pokemon that may not exactly be what you think of when it comes to being tanky. Once again, the ability I assume most associate with it is Pure Power, a great ability that has no use for me right now. It's been a while, the first gym battle in fact, but I'm going to go back to Sap Sipper. Flapple being a grass and dragon Pokemon naturally has dragon and grass type attacks, a perfectly reasonable set for it. But this does position my Azumarill to now be immune to 3 out of 4 of the attacks. And as a nice little bonus, Flapper already wasted one of its Aerial Ace PP earlier. After practically a whole campaign of not needing any PP ups, this is the second time in this battle where I've needed to increase the PP of one of my moves. Thankfully, Defense Curl's massive default power points means that a couple of PP ups used on it should be enough to get me through 2 Pokemon. You know what's actually quite amusing? Although the health recovery from Aqua Ring is nice, I don't really need it, leftovers is enough. That means I could have in theory kept Splash on my moveset from when it was in Azurill, and that would have saved me a lot of bother. Silly me deleting Splash from my moveset as soon as I could. Seriously though, I'm pretty good to have missed a genuine reason to use Splash in a challenge. My other moves are pretty important though. I started off by using 3 charms to devastate Flapple's attack stat. With the immediate danger dealt with, I could start preparing for the next Pokemon by using a bunch of defense curls. Once again, with minimized attacks going into maximized defense, it was just a waiting game until Flapple went down. Finally, Baxcalibur comes in, and I thought it was a mistake when I was looking at its moveset online. It has 3 attacks listed: Icicle Crash, Brick Break and Glaive Rush. Why on earth does an Elite 4 member, no, the final Elite 4 member, have a Pokemon with only 3 moves? His ace Pokemon. As far as stall goes, this is great news for me though, less to worry about. One of the 3 moves I don't need to worry about at all, since Glaive Rush is a Dragon type. The 2 remaining moves are types that I resist as well. Combine that with the fact I'm starting this battle with a maxed out defense, all I need to do is spam Charm and pray that there isn't too many critical hits. This would have been the perfect time to hop around with Splash, but regardless, that's the main cast of the Elite 4 beaten. All the preparation really paid off. I don't think I had to fight any of the members more than a handful of times. But of course, I can't count myself done just yet. I have one more fight before I can take a breather. Alright, champion time. And I know Geeta isn't known for being one of the better champion fights, but this is the first time I've had to go up against an opponent that had a full team of 6. Yet another battle where Cyclozar's typing is perfect. I can bait a Dazzling Gleam and have it deal very little damage to the Glamora I switch in. Why does that keep happening this run? I really didn't plan for it to work out that much, but it always seems to be the case that whenever I swap Cyclozar out, it's for the perfect type to tank the next attack really well. My good luck aside, it's time to show Geeta how to really use Glamora. She only has 1 poison type on her team, her own Glamora, and while she may be flexible in which order she brings Pokemon in, she'll always leave her ace Pokemon for last. That means, if I can get Layer of Toxic Spikes up, it's going to rip through half of her team. This is another fight where I need to get Glamora out safely, since Espathra has access to a priority move. Once again though, it is Quick Attack, so I can safely pivot in Frostlass. While it does have the advantage of being immune to Quick Attack and being fast enough to safely set up a substitute, Frostlass's defences aren't anything too great, so the sub gets broken pretty easily. If Geeta had just stayed on the offensive, she may have broken through and dealt damage, but she decides to use Reflect one turn. That's all I needed. That was an opportunity to set up a double team, which in turn would mean that down the road I could have a light screen and actually maintain my substitutes. Amusingly, me using these double teams means that Espathra's Opportunist kicks in, boosting its evasion a lot higher too. It's a shame that the animation for double team doesn't persist and each time leave extra copies on the battlefield. It would end up looking like something from Naruto. This first stand-up actually makes up a third of the whole battle, so things do pick up a bit after this. That said, the Toxic Spikes won't come into play just yet, as Geeta sends in King Gambit. I am glad to see it earlier rather than later as well, since it shouldn't be getting as big of a power boost from Supreme Overload here. On top of that, I decided to go with Crocodile here, because it has the Intimidate ability, which will undo the boost and then some. I start things off by using Sand Attack. This is more in preparation for later, since King Gambit's signature move Kowtow Cleave bypasses accuracy checks, and it'll always land. I'll just have to do my best tanking these for now. On the plus side, the unresisted Iron Head may be able to crack my substitute, but I do start dodging that. That's the 2 main stab moves covered. Next, when a chance arose I used Torment. For now that wasn't too big of a deal. Not being able to use the same move twice in a row didn't matter too much since King Gambit had multiple strong attacks to choose from, but eventually it will have to resort to using Zen Headbutt. A free turn here and there from a psychic attack would be greatly appreciated, giving Crocodile a chance to catch its breath. Without any other ways to boost my defense, it's a little closer than I'd hope it would be, but King Gambit does finally go down. Now it's time for the payoff from setting up Toxic Spikes earlier. I get Cloistering with a substitute against a Poison Go-Goat, and I actually decide to use Terra Bug. As bad of a typing bug is in general, Geeta doesn't have too many moves that are super effective against it, which means Cloyster has a chance to give a boost to its already impressive defense. Things were only going to improve from here. As I mentioned a while ago, Cloyster's ability Shell Armor means I don't even have to worry about a crit ruining its fun. I could get my defense stat maxed out, and then move on to using Supersonic. Although I've talked about Confusion being allowed in this challenge, for the most part I've avoided the status since it goes against the PP stall I was trying to go for. That's not the case here though, so any turns when my opponent's Pokemon would hit itself in Confusion, it's a bonus on top of the poison, and it means my sub would be in a better state long term. In theory, Veluza should be in the same situation as Gogoat. The poison status has on a pretty short timer that shouldn't be too hard to stall out. This is another Pokemon though with the Mold Breaker status. I still have a massive defense stat, but it does mean it is possible for it to crit. With only a few turns to worry about, I hope that it wouldn't make too much of a difference. I do manage to land my first Supersonic, and even better, the first attack used while confused causes Veluza to hit itself in confusion. It was going well until it snaps out of confusion and lands a critical hit Psycho Cut. I forgot that move has a higher critical hit chance. My sub being broken wouldn't have bothered me as much if it wasn't for the fact that I'd already seen that Veluza uses Aqua Jet. I guess Geeta wasn't as bothered about the type resistance. Fortunately, she did decide to stick with Psycho Cut, so I outspeed and get the sub back. It does seem a bit weird that a pretty aerodynamic looking fish can't outspeed a big bulky shell, but oh well. Cloyster still has plenty of energy left in the tank, so we move on to Avalugg next. I'm back to being crit immune, and Avalugg's only stab type is Ice, which Cloyster double resists. There's no issue trying to stall this one out, with the only downside being Avalugg's ability Own Tempo. This ability prevents it from being confused. I mean, the confusion damage would probably have only saved me an extra turn, so if that's the only problem going into this matchup, I can't really complain. The final Pokemon is Glimmora, a special attacker that has access to a powerful rock type special attack. Yeah, I think Cloyster's done enough, time to switch it out. Cyclozar's final appearance in this run sees it being targeted by a fairy type move once again. Also, if it hadn't become clear during the Elite Four, I'd gotten a new Cyclozar with its hidden ability Regenerator. That's how I was able to abuse Shedtail so much. Dazzling Gleam is what I was hoping to see again as I bring Glimmora back, but Geeta's Glimmora decided to use Terra Blast, breaking the sub immediately. That's fine though, my Glimmora's been EV trained in speed, and all I'm doing is getting out of there with Memento. Cyclozar comes back in, a little below 50% HP, but that's fine. It's got enough to recover back into the green with a turn of Protect. Geeta seems more interested in using Terra Blast now instead of Dazzling Gleam, but the special attack debuff does mean I can get a Revroom in without it losing the sub. Glimmora's moves have a different level of effectiveness against Revroom. Being a Steel type, I don't need to worry about Sludge Wave. I'd also say Dazzling Gleam is a non-issue since it's double resisted. Rock type Terra Blast is a pretty powerful, but I've already seen it isn't actually strong enough to instantly break a sub. That just leaves Earth Power. Since I'm a Steel and Poison type, Earth Power can almost certainly shred its way through me. At least, that would have been the case if Revroom didn't have access to Magnet Rise. Using it, Revroom will hover in the air for 5 turns, turning its massive ground weakness into an immunity. That's not all. Since Magnet Rise has 10 power points, I can spend 50 turns in that state. The combined PP total of all of Geeta's attacks is 40. This means, even if she saves all of her Earth Powers until the end, it's mathematically impossible for her to use one successfully, as long as I correctly stay on top of things. If all of that didn't make it clear, I can easily stall out the 20 attacks that can actually deal damage at all, with plenty of substitutes to spare. Eventually, Glimmora knocks itself out due to struggle recoil, and I'm crowned the champion. My goal for this challenge though was to complete the Victory Road story arc, not become the champion. There is one last fight I need to take care of, and let's be honest, I have been keeping her waiting a long time. Finally, it was time to give Nemona an all-out champion on champion battle. It seems fitting that this was the final battle, since it almost acts as a best of from all my other teams, and of course, one of those members uses Toxic Debris. Looking at Nemona's team, there's no poison type Pokemon to absorb any toxic spikes, and in fact, only one Pokemon on her team can avoid the poison damage at all. So, if I was able to set up toxic spikes early, 2/3 of her team could be taken care of pretty quick. As with her other encounters, Lycanroc was the opener once again, and as we know at this point, it has a concerning priority attack. To try and stop Nemona from using it, I open with Klefki to bait in a ground type move, immediately switch to a Terra type of flying, then switch her to a Choice Scarf, locking it into Drill Run. Next up, I use Thunder Wave on Lycanroc. This has 2 benefits. Firstly, the paralysis counteracts the speed boost from Choice Scarf, but actually, more importantly here is the paralysis chance. I want to bring in Glimmora, but Klefki can't do it for me safely, so first I switched it out for Earthworm. It isn't a flying type, nor does it have Levitate, but its ability Earth Eater means ground type moves will actually heal it as opposed to dealing damage. Despite the speed drop for Lycanroc, Earthworm is still slower, and this is quite beneficial here. Since it's able to absorb an attack, I could Shed Tail to bring in Glamora without any risk of the sub being broken immediately, since Lycanroc has already made its move that turn. During the next turn, it wouldn't matter if the sub was broken or not. That one turn was enough for Glamora to become faster than Lycanroc by using Rock Polish. I can now safely set up a replacement sub every turn, allowing me to get down to 1 HP and set up Toxic Spikes as quick as possible. With the stage now set, I swapped out again for Drifloon, not having to worry about any priority move since Lycanroc was still locked in. Now it's time to begin preparing for the Pokemon I'd be stalling with while the poison damage did its thing. The obvious place to start was to begin spamming Minimize as much as possible. What better way to protect myself from damage if I could pass around maxed out evasion? This was the reason I wanted the paralysis chance. Any extra turns gifted to me from these was just another turn I could spend doing more boosting. Just before Lycanroc knocks itself out, I bat and pass over to Oricorio to get ready to work on other stat boosts. As a little bonus, the paralysis kicks in again, so I get a free Quiver Dance boost before moving on. Goodra comes in next, and surprisingly, despite me having huge evasion and a +2 in special defense, Goodra is able to break my sub with its first attack. It manages to do it a second time, but I'm not that worried. I knew it would miss soon enough, after which I could continue building up my stats. It is a bit of a shame after maxing out my special defense stat that I wouldn't really need it for the rest of the battle, since Goodra is really the only special attacker on this team. On the plus side, at least I have speed boost to pass around now. As I watch Goodra's HP go down, I'm left thinking, whatever happened to trainers using items in Pokemon games? A lot of the higher level ones used to have a full restore. Clearing Goodra's status and restoring its health would have caused me a lot of grief. Just before it faints, I switch back out for Drifloon. This prompts Nemona to bring in Pawmot next. It is a bit of a threat since it has the capability to use powerful super effective attacks, but Drifloon still has access to Strength Sap, which will probably be my best option to weaken the rest of Nemona's team. Much like Goodra using Ice Beam before, Pawmot is able to get over the evasion boosts and attack stat drop and break Drifloon's sub immediately with a double shock. Unlike the Ice Beam though, this isn't an attack that can be so freely spammed. Well, it can be used multiple times, but the first use got rid of its electric typing, thus causing a power decrease. I used Strength Sap a few more times, but I try to avoid going overboard since this isn't the only Pokemon that I need to use this move against. After a while, it becomes much less of a threat, even with another super effective attack in its arsenal. Dunsparce is up next, and going into this one I was pretty confident it wouldn't be too difficult to deal with. Its moveset is made up of 2 moves that can't hurt Drifloon, a boosting move, which yes could be troubling but Dunsparce is on a short timer, and its last move is Dragon Rush, a move of 75% base accuracy. Considering everything it had going against it, Dunsparce manages to land multiple Dragon Rushes in a row, breaking my sub each time, even without it being stab, and I'd already used Strength Sap on it. It's a mixed bag seeing Coil. On the one hand, yes, it does give me a free turn, but on the other hand, it negates my Strength Sap and patches up its accuracy issues. Not that I actually seemed to be bothering it anyway. Honestly, I don't know what was going on with these Dragon Rushes. The only thing I can think of is, I've used Minimize quite a few times, and I'm pretty sure there's a weird interaction with Pokemon that have used that move being hit easier by Body Slam, or it does more damage or something. The animation for Dragon Rush seems similar to that of Body Slam, so maybe it also has a similar weird interaction. Thankfully, I didn't have to PP stall that move. I'm not sure how long Drifloon could have kept this going. Nemona's second to last Pokemon is Earthworm. Being a Steel type means it's the one Pokemon on her team that is immune to my Toxic Spikes, so back to wasting power points. As we've come to learn in this run, Cloyster is the Pokemon for the job when it comes to stalling out physical attackers. The super effective Body Press won't really be too much of a problem, but annoyingly it is another Pokemon that knows Rock Blast. It should be less risky here though. I already have my evasion boosts, and since Earthworm seems focused on using Iron Tail at the start of the fight, I have time to boost my defense using Withdraw. With my defense maxed out, all I could do, other than throw in the odd Protect here and there, is wait and see what happened. In this particular attempt, almost every Rock Blast missed. The only one that did land hit just 2 times. Now, considering all the boost Cloyster had, I did something that may have been a bit silly after Earthworm fainted. I made the questionable decision to switch out for Oricorio. Cloyster almost certainly could have dealt with Quick Carvel, but I guess there was always the chance that Aqua Step would have caused it to outspeed, and able to break my sub, there would have been nothing I could have done to stop it. At least by switching Oricorio in, it meant anytime Kofu got a speed boost from Aqua Step, I'd be able to match it thanks to being in the Dancer category. This meant I was safely able to switch between Protect and Substitute each turn. I could even add a little damage on top of the poison to get things done a little bit quicker. And that's it! The Victory Road story is complete. If you watched all the way through this challenge, thank you very much. If anyone is skeptical that I may have edited out times I took damage, you can watch the battles in full and unedited. I've uploaded them to a second account which is linked in the description. But more importantly, if you like this challenge, let me know and I'll probably take on the rest of the game under these conditions. But for now, that's all, so I'll see you next time.